Kraft, just a 16-year-old, swore he'd become an adventurer, and now 4 years have ripped by. At that point, he had to team up with people so stubborn they couldn't even sit down and talk about what came next. But even so, they made the call to dump Kraft because in their eyes, he was nothing more than a temporary plug, not family. One of the guys, hand over his face, couldn't believe Kraft was even a mage. He barely threw out any magic and felt totally useless. When Kraft heard that, a rock formed in his throat, because everyone went silent after his magical seal turned out to be a forgery. How on earth was that possible, when he only knew basic spells? Kraft gripped the staff with shaking hands, and the girl quietly confessed that even his own skill was shaky and no spark of adventure ever showed up in him. It cut straight to his soul, but he gritted his teeth and admitted it. This time, the group had been right. Kraft got the boot again, and now he stumbled into the Adventurers Guild with tears pouring down his face only. This time, the secretary didn't even blink, just nodded like he'd seen it all before, saying it stung her. But she couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't right for the job. And this wasn't even the first time it had happened. Kraft's lost count of how many groups have kicked him out, but still he pushed on, clinging to one dream to become strong. His combat spells were pathetic against even the weakest monsters. They just wouldn't cut it, so he had no choice but to shout for help. He could pull off only tiny spells like conjuring a little drinking water, but it took forever, so everyone else just couldn't count on him. So they kicked him out, shoved papers into his hands to sign, and made it crystal clear he never should have shown up in the first place. Kraft quietly pleaded for their forgiveness, but the moment it was over, he had no clue what came next. Then the secretary snapped back to the Builders Guild request and realized this was the first time he'd ever heard of something like it. He pressed them for the exact job they were offering. She leaned in and said the strange job was simple to describe, but wild in its stakes, building a whole village right near the border road. You'll need someone who can stick it out there for the long haul. So they just slapped Kraft with the order to go as an extra, like he was being shipped off with zero effect on the guild. The secretary prayed he wouldn't take it the wrong way. She wanted the job handed to someone who'd buckle in a fight. Kraft hated the idea, but in the end, he had no choice. The secretary froze at the sheer audacity of his decision. But when she saw how dead serious he was, she vowed to push the paperwork through fast, so he didn't just get kicked out of the group, he got tossed out of the guild too. A fresh burst of energy lit him up. This step felt like a turning point, because from here on out, he was throwing his whole future behind the builder's craft. Dead sure everything was about to get better. Suddenly, a deep rumble thundered behind him. He spun around and saw several young men dragging a massive load toward him. The carriers shoved and jostled each other, then forced their way through the packed crowd of workers in the yard. One of them snapped at his friend for spending money so wisely. Then Kraft finally noticed just how packed the crowd was around him. Because the moment he did, someone suddenly called his name. The master shot him a sharp look, and when the answer came, learned the young man had come straight from the Adventurers Guild to sign up for building a brand new border settlement. With the newcomer in his good graces, the master slapped Kraft on the shoulder, barked at the team to stay sharp, and guided him straight to headquarters, then thanked him for backing them up. At the Builders Guild, a stern, dignified leader was already there, waiting like he'd been expecting them the whole time. He pumped Kraft's hand, grinning at how perfectly that name fit the next great architect, then lit up the guy with a cheerful push forward. While sorting through the paperwork, the driver spotted the word mage in the profession box, and Kraft winced as he confessed he'd only learned the most basic spells. The chief snapped that the young man never got a real seal check, then dared to unlock the buried power nobody had seen yet. Because the kid was born with a huge mana reserve, the seal was supposed to crack open incredible possibilities, and the hall even had a minister there who could judge it. The assistant let out a heavy sigh, replaying the procedure's brutal price, but the chief calmly promised, "It's already handled. Everything's paid for." And Kraft couldn't shake the shock of their sudden warmth, because something in him screamed they had an angle. Even with everyone questioning whether the seal could really hold, he still nodded and agreed to get it checked. The chief summoned the gray-bearded herald, San, and watched as he slowly pushed himself up from his chair and strode closer. The venerable elder locked eyes with the young man and declared they had to run a diagnosis on the heraldic seal right now. Kraft thrust out his palm, and the moment sand triggered the artifact, a blinding burst of light snapped around him, washing the boy in a searing glow of analysis. The herald's eyes snapped wide open, and the shock hit him like a punch. He recoiled, insisting what he saw was impossible. And all around him Kraft included froze in sheer, anxious disbelief. An old servant leaned in and warned him straight up. The young man's seal clashes so violently with his own power that using it could wreck his health. The seal didn't just fail, it clashed with Kraft so hard that the realization nearly sent him toppling to the ground. Suddenly it hit him. This was the thing that had been strangling his powers again and again. The herald, who works for the diagnostician, demanded they swap the coat of arms right away because that poisonous seal was pure danger. The whole thing was a race against time. If that guy nodded, the master would swap the paddle out right on the spot. Kraft demanded to know which coat of arms fit best, and the elder admitted right to his face that this was a truly strange case. The most perfect match was the emblem with unbelievable power so rare that even the magic world could barely get its hands on it. The boy absolutely nailed the Twilight Alchemist seal on a level fit for God, so everyone there was stunned, because nobody saw it coming. The guildmaster yanked the young man by the shoulders and practically shouted, "You're the Twilight Alchemist." And honestly, nobody had ever witnessed something like this before. When the capture hit, it nearly rattled the boy out of his skin heck. Even the herald didn't buy it at first, because the gap between an ordinary rank and a Twilight rank is absolutely massive. Alchemists were already prized, and the Twilight rank was treated like a myth, something nobody had ever seen or even managed to reach. Just like those knightly seals get lifted in the Saint and Dragon ranks, the Twilight rank is the next big jump right after a regular alchemist. That meant Kraft could be the strongest alchemist of them all, no matter what rank you threw at him. Gerald swore nobody had ever climbed that high, so the rank stayed maybe. But the meaning was crystal clear. By mastering alchemy, the seal's owner could, in theory, turn spells into pure gold. Gerald leaned in and asked if the young man wanted to swap the coat of arms. Kraft remembered those brutal last 4 years and suddenly saw this as his shot. He silently bade farewell to the old seal and snapped, "Start the shift," like he meant it. The elder lifted his staff, poured his power into the air, and soothed the boy by chanting the rewriting formula. The light surged straight toward Kraft and, with no hesitation, crowned him as the Twilight Alchemist. The young man stared at the fresh, shining stamp on his palm, and pure shock hit him like lightning. A pure, unstoppable mana still held back snaps free and crashes over him, flooding his body with raw, uncontrollable power. When Kraft finally felt that pure mana flooding his veins, he couldn't even breathe, because this wasn't some phantom dream anymore. It was real power. The old seal shattered away, and then boom, the coat of arms flared to life in a warm golden blaze, like the gods themselves had just crowned it with pure radiant power. The shocked herald finally snapped, "I've never seen anything like this in my entire life," and he swore he had to tell this unbelievable tale to every other guardian. Kraft blurted out a heartfelt thank you, feeling brand new in his bones, while the old venerable elder just gave a calm nod, because guiding the chosen was his very purpose. Suddenly, the dead quiet shattered as a woman's breathless gasp erupted pure awe, totally unstoppable. Tiny, desperate Lifa finally stood face to face with a lone, high-ranking alchemist for the first time, and her excitement spilled out without a single attempt to hide it. The girl hurried toward the border village and greeted Kraft with a warm smile, and the young man shot back a quick reply, still blushing a little. He figured she was still too young, but her confident tone hit back, proving she had real experience, and the alchemist's presence shot everyone's confidence through the roof for the expedition. Turns out it was Life who was leading the construction crew, something that shocked Kraft to his core, and the guild leader immediately started wondering if it was even worth hauling a rare specialist that far. With the newcomer finally welcomed, the girl snapped that the route wasn't changing. Kraft had to stay with the squad. The leader started to protest, but the young man's face burned with shame, because Lifa's delicate frame hid a kind of steel-hard resolve. To silence every doubt, the leader pointed straight at the dwarf blood in her veins and her astonishing age. Then everyone felt his stare hit like a razor. When the years were mentioned, Lifa snapped, snatching a massive hammer while the frantic leader crumpled to his knees and begged her for mercy. With all those tearful apologies, the girl finally lowered her weapon while Kraft stared in stunned disbelief, seeing just how utterly defenseless this respectable man really was. The young man couldn't stop a silent hope, just for once, let that hammer hover a moment longer over him, because watching his brand new partner toy with the authorities was downright unbearable. That joke from the head hit Lifa's nerves again, and she slammed the floor with the hammer at full force, smashing the boards into jagged splinters. The wooden cover shattered, and the girl shrugged like she already knew every single coin of that repair bill was about to land on the guild. She flat out declared her team would foot the bill. Nobody even dared to argue, and Kraft stayed wisely quiet, choosing not to defend the manager. He was small in stature, but dangerously strong, so the late compliment from the head made him shiver, and only reassured Life, because they kept calling him Little. To switch the topic, he tossed out that the girl must have carried noble blood straight from a border count's line. Yet every word left Kraft completely baffled. Kraft had never heard of a nobleman running a border village. Yet the head still pushed for him to sit down and negotiate, determined to bring peace to everyone. The boy's heart hammered with anxiety, but the boss promised him that with the Earth Gnome and the Twilight Alchemist on their side, no problem could stand in their way. This was Kraft's first real alchemy contract, and he swore he'd pour everything into it, while Lifa threw her whole heart behind the team. The very next morning, the whole squad stood on high alert, and that girl dropped the news that the carts got loaded at record speed. Nearly half the guild charged onto the road, dozens of carts piled high with gear and supplies, packed with everything they'd need once they hit the unknown. Kraft snatched up his stuff, slapped the alchemist's seal into place, and then, boom, he finally learned spatial storage after wrestling with it through the whole night. He suggested shifting the luggage, but his friends blinked in confusion, so Lifa stepped in fast and warned them not to go digging for pointless answers. And honestly, space storage is crazy rare, so nobody in the room ever guessed Kraft had that kind of power. Magic could juggle mountains of stuff, so the Lifa leader leaned in hard and snapped at the young man to clear out the very first cart. When Kraft stared at that mountain of cargo, doubt hit him hard, but the boss just smirked and said, "Relax. We only have to handle one cart." The carts groaned under bricks and water because this was the real trial, pushing both space and endurance to the limit of mana. The boy clenched his courage, fired up the spell, and drove it straight into that hulking transport. With a blinding flash, the whole cart vanished into thin air like it had never existed at all. Then he calmly swung back with the cargo, double-checking he could still control that new power. The leader burst out in thrilled amazement, and Lifa admitted this was the first time she'd ever seen a weave hit that hard. Kraft finally got it. No alchemy needed anymore. He could make serious money as a cargo mage. After soaking up the praise, the young man grabbed the second cart, and the boss barked for the rest of the transport to roll in closer. The chief jabbed at a few more carts, and Kraft gritted his teeth and pushed his limits to see how far his space could truly stretch. Surprisingly to his companions, he stashed loaded carts one after another, so smoothly he barely even seemed tired. Friends erupted in excitement, calling the guy incredible, because with his help, everything got prepped at lightning speed, and Lifa flashed him a warm, grateful smile. Kraft watched his comrades stare, and you could see it on their faces, pleasure, mixed with real worry. The boss dangled a promise 20% of the cart rental for the guy, even though the guy thought it was barely worth it. The leader snapped a warning. If the Twilight Alchemist hands out free work, eyes will zero in and trouble will come crashing in fast. By stuffing the squad's goods away, Kraft raked in a huge profit. And for the next few months, the chaos finally gave them a breather. Staring at the golden seal, the young man clenched his resolve and dreamed of the power the new stamp would unleash. Lifa sprinted in, swung her hand, and insisted they skip the formalities. From this moment on, they were friends so. Kraft grinned and called her by her first name, like it was always meant to be. With Kraft and Lifa at their side, the leader pushes the squad forward, and they charge straight for the village. The girl shot him a good luck, and the young man lit up as he thanked her for cheering him on. With Lifa urging him on, the boy stepped into this brand new life like he owned it, ready to become the Twilight Alchemist. He got kicked out for weak magic, and now everything's flipped upside down. The strongest seal slammed the craft into a deal so perfectly matched it felt like fate. Right now, he's racing toward Kaiteki, official alchemist of the expedition, and the brains behind the whole operation. In my head, I swore I'd prove to everyone what I'm really capable of. At first, the colonists' send-off ritual felt weird as heck until Lifa stepped in and said it's the one thing that makes the whole journey succeed. Right when she prayed for it to end fast, the order to evacuate finally blared. A whole squad of soldiers surged into view ahead, marching in perfect lockstep. The head tried to bring up the request for a modest ceremony, but the guard snapped him off with a cold, stern interruption. The soldier leaned in and made it clear travelers must be respected, because they've crossed a long, brutal distance to get here. Young Zaid stood in his parade uniform and waved at the head, his mind flashing back to an old acquaintance. The honored guest finally stepped in, and everyone dropped to their knees except surprised Kraft, who just froze in shock. Lifa, already bowed, tugged the young man down gently and whispered, "Now, you bow too." Zaid waved everyone off like, "Relax, this isn't some stiff ceremony. It's a friendly meet," making the whole bowing thing unnecessary. Then it hit them Kaiteka's future settlement leader wasn't chosen at random. It was his younger brother who got the job. Young Kale Gazotvel, barely a teenager, stepped out to lead the colony while his shy little sister clung close behind him. The squad's leader swallowed hard, and Lifa felt that same cold dread crash through her. Then Kraft started sharing it too. Kale stepped up with a polite smile, greeted the expedition, and introduced his little sister Mina, who peeked out shyly from behind him like she was bracing for the spotlight. The girl slipped out a soft hello, and her brother leaned in and said Mina would tag along for some personal reason. The head warned him about the dangers of the long road and demanded they double-check the kid's lineup, but Zaid shut it down with a cold, dismissive wave. The older brother dumped every responsibility on Kyle's shoulders and made it clear that if Kyle failed, everyone would instantly label it as his incompetence. That ruthless line snapped through the escort like a cold blade, and he shuddered as he felt the patron's icy voice cut into him. Kraft caught that muted despair flicker in Kyle's eyes and instantly knew the poor guy was being shoved straight into a dead end. Zaid tossed out the challenge like it was destiny's setup for the annoying brother to finally prove he's got real worth, and flashed a mischievous smirk. Crushed by the cynicism around him, Kraft clenched his resolve and swore he'd back the colony to victory and guard the young lord's name like it was his own. Lifa kept darting her eyes between the two of them, and the moment she realized how badly their intentions clashed, her nerves went on full alert. The young man felt he and Kyle shared the same scar, because he'd been an outsider once. So he stepped in to back the kid and keep a close watch. He swore to Zaid he'd prove he wasn't useless, and he vowed he'd come back with victory before the blink of an eye. The patron froze in confusion, then burst into laughter, convinced Kraft's stubborn drive was just a hilarious joke. Before parting, he drilled one thing into his brother. The mission's outcome comes first, luck comes last, and he coldly wished him success. Kraft mentally labeled the ceremony the worst day of his life, while Lifa, missing the joke, stormed in and shoved the guy. At the same time, the head seized the young man by the shoulders and loudly praised him for his bravery. Kyle ducked out of the way and, with real sincerity, begged Kraft to finally tell him what lit such brutal words in the first place. Lifa and the head dipped low before the young lord, swallowing their pride, admitting the reckless disrespect and begging him for forgiveness. Kraft blurted out his name, admitted the screw-up on the spot, and then boom, the moment hit him like a flashback to all his own past failures. The young man spilled the truth about those years when he was a powerless adventurer, always falling short and somehow still trying to earn everyone's approval. Even though the situation was still a blur, he rushed in to back Kyle up and snap him out of that confusion. The Shy Lord gripped his coat like it was armor, admitted his weakness to his face, and swore he'd give everything he had. His heartfelt speech hit the crowd hard, and suddenly everyone felt that burning urge to jump in and help. Kyle threw out a heartfelt apology, promised he'd do everything he could, and then asked Kraft to back him up in return. Kraft, smiling warmly, said that when everyone fights together, success always shows up, and his comrades nodded, ready to clash for one shared victory. People remembered how Kyle pushed for fair taxes and real kindness, and that's when they vowed to band together and hit at full strength. The young man burst into tears of gratitude, and everyone surged toward him like fresh spring shoots, rallying around him. After some time, the squad and craft tore out of the construction guild and hit a forest road everyone warned them about dangerous, sure, but shorter. 2 long days of hiking tore by, and they barely clawed their way to a quarter of the route. Leafa strode at the front with the main character, constantly whipping around to make sure nobody got left in the dust. At that lightning pace, everyone got wiped out and begged for a quick break. Even after the van ride, Kyle and Mina were wiped out, and Leafa called for a break only to stretch the hike's timeline even longer. As evening rolled in, Kraft struck a fire and Leafa realized just how brutally hard it was to keep to a strict schedule. The young man suddenly remembered the endurance potion, a simple little drink that stretched his time of vitality. The real problem hit hard. They were short on herbs because the normal recipe demanded a whole bucket of plants for just 1 serving. With the brand new seal of the Twilight alchemist stamped into place, Kraft was betting everything on whipping up a powerful elixir no matter how small that spoonful of dried healing herbs was. The young man wasted 0 time. He grabbed a mug, filled it with water, scooped a spoonful of dried herbs straight from the spatial storage, and dumped it all into the container. He poured his alchemical mana into a single burst and forged the elixir of endurance for the very first time, an unbelievable win for a brand new alchemist. Thick vapors billowed from the bowl and Kraft stalled for a heartbeat, while Leafa was already sure the potion was done, so she snapped the assessment magic to life. She snapped back to consciousness, and her face drained of color as she realized the young man really made the potion himself. At first, she thought someone was messing with her because that liquid looked way too weird to be real. Leafa's eyes flared with wonder. Right in front of her sat an elixir so legendary it felt unreal. Kraft stared at the glass in shock. Turns out that drink's power lasts for a full 1,000 years, hits you for half a day, and then blasts your endurance sky high. Leafa clamped her hands on the boy's shoulders, shook him hard, and fought for answers. Because there was no way he'd cooked up a rarity she couldn't recreate even after a whole year. Shocked, the alchemist swore he'd whip up that potion for everyone the second dawn cracked, no matter what. Morning came, and he and Leafa stirred a dose of elixir into the vegetable soup. I mend him. Yesterday they could barely stand, and now boom energy hits like a thunderclap. So the whole squad races around the camp like they're young guns in a competition. Even the horses gulped from the bucket, and now they stomped with raw power so healthy you could see it with your own eyes. Kraft thrust the bottle into Kyle and Mina's hands, swearing it was totally safe to drink. Alfred and Persia, these bodyguards of the young lord, cornered him and demanded to know where that insanely powerful elixir even came from. They couldn't shake the feeling it was suspicious. This powerful remedy showing up out of nowhere screamed trouble, and Kyle urged his friends to stay calm. The master's trusting words landed hard on the guards, but doubt still gnawed at them, so they grabbed the potion and tested it on themselves. Alfred yanked the bottle right out of Kraft's hands and chugged it in one go. Then he jolted, clutching his chest like it had just punched him from the inside. He collapsed to his knees, then snapped back upright, and with a burst of raw, overflowing energy, his whole body lit up the moment, leaving everyone staring in total shock. Raw power tore through him, and everyone there went still staring as the warrior's strength burst and overflowed right in front of their eyes. Persia was terrified at first, then she realized no side effects showed up, and that potion was truly safe and wildly effective. Alfred's eyes blazed like fire. He felt like he could topple mountains. Then the alarm screamed. Goblin hordes were closing in on the camp, and only Persia saw the threat in time. Without a second thought, the guard tore ahead, leaving his companions staring at a swirl of dust, and just like that, he slammed chest first into the monster horde. Toothy goblins slammed blades and wooden clubs together, shrieking like maniacs to hype each other up. Alfred hurled himself forward with everything he had, smashed the air with a thunderous blade swing, then sealed it all by unleashing a devastating wolf slash. Those brand new powers let him pull off the wildest, most complicated moves, with 0 fatigue, and even the warrior watching couldn't believe it. The elixir-charged camp was already running ahead of schedule, and Kraft refused to slow down. He was hell-bent on finishing the plan twice as fast. That month-long journey got crushed into just a week, and when they finally arrived, they didn't move an inch until they confirmed the goal was truly there. People couldn't even string words together. Everything felt totally unreal, and Kraft was right there with them. To him, this place was pure opportunity, wide-open plains, begging to be turned into a fresh settlement and brand-new dreams. Kraft couldn't believe the truth when he was told it had been marked empty, because once, that spot definitely held travelers' homes, and Lifa told him the moment that knowledge hit him, he just stared in shock. The girl grinned and told him this was the place where her childhood lived, and where her warmest memories finally came alive. She cozied up to the creaky old wooden column, her heart soaring the moment those distant voices finally called them back. It was Kyle, and he pushed the idea to talk things out before they started building, following Alfar's advice and gathering everyone in a circle. The plan sounded absolutely perfect to Lifa. Everyone adored Kyle, and would actually listen to him, so she bolted off to rally her friends. Kraft only just caught on that this was Lifa's hometown, so he bit his questions back, refusing to pry and risk wrecking the past. He tried to figure out how to cheer her up when Kyle called his name, and as soon as he clocked the delay, he blurted out an apology for getting distracted. Kyle's stare burned with intensity, begging for real connection. Then Kraft, face flushed, stumbled backward in sheer embarrassment. The young lord insisted that Kraft has him fully protected, begged everyone to drop the stiff formalities, even as the stern guards never took their eyes off a single move. Kyle clenched his fists and said he had to have open conversations because without them, he'd never unlock his potential alongside a mentor like that. With a sincere, almost childlike plea on his face, the Lord spun toward Kraft while the hero immediately looked away, knowing he couldn't say no. For a few tense moments, the boys locked eyes, their compassion buzzing in the air as they silently grappled with everything they couldn't say. In the end, Kraft caved and told Kyle, "If you want it simple, fine, drop the formalities, with one condition. Kyle better not come back later and complain." The Lord's face lit up with joy. Persia snapped at the hero to keep that easy familiarity away from the nobles, and grim Alfard just swallowed his pride and accepted the master's command. After a quick meeting, the site got the green light as a border outpost, and Kyle got the big honor of spearheading the whole project side by side with the construction crew. Beyond the mountain ridge, fertile plains spread out beneath thick forests, and the settlement had to be rebuilt, fast walls up, defenses tight, or they'd be wiped out. The young leader swore he'd go all in, then turned to everyone and demanded their support for his brand new role. The crowd shot their hands up together, roaring their approval for the young lord's raw drive and chanting words of encouragement like they meant it. Even the tight-lipped Persians with Alfard were wrecked by emotion, bursting into praise for the speech their protege had just inspired. Kraft saw Mina, still clutching her brother, slip into the shadows, going so quiet she couldn't even bring herself to speak. The moment the hero locked eyes with her, the girl jerked back in embarrassment, thrown off by the sudden attention. He stretched out his palm, urging her to stay close and steady herself, and Mina snapped her eyes up in shock. Just as Kyle was about to drop the next piece of news, she panicked, grabbed Kraft, and clung to him in front of everyone, like it was the only move she had. The young man snapped his command, "Look back," and the crowd obeyed instantly, turning right where he told them. Right when everyone's eyes snapped to them, the alchemist got swept into Mina's arms while Kyle, grinning, toasted the elixir's power and Mina's amazing talent. The captivated workers swarmed in, hoisted Kraft onto their shoulders, and blasted him with applause, even as he begged them to slow down. Even with the hero protesting, the crowd kept hurling him up again and again, like they were whipping him through the air as a living banner of hope. Lifa flashed a smile, warning that trust like this demands something huge, while Kraft begged it to stop. Breathing hard under all that attention, he begged to shut the celebrations down fast. He was sure the flashy pomp would burn everyone out in no time. As the applause finally died down, the hero gulped in air, and Lifa pitched the idea of getting closer while they worked together, and the whole crowd nodded in total agreement. From this point on, Lifa took charge of the temporary housing, hammered home that everyone had to read the project manual, and the residents couldn't wait to jump on every task she laid out. After the goodbye, Lifa thanked the adventurers for the escort and held out a reward yet, When they refused the cash, she relented and handed them a bottle of endurance potion instead. One single drop of Kraft's elixir was worth more than gold. So he snatched the vial while Lifa made it crystal clear she hated the whole idea. The girl warned them that this rare tincture demanded a special flask or its power would evaporate. But her companions brushed it off like it was nothing. Kraft coolly promised that the potion would stay deadly effective for a whole millennium, even stuffed in a plain little pouch, and it left everyone in the room staring in disbelief. He then tossed out that there are flasks that can keep a drink fresh for a billion years, and the whole room lit up with admiration. Someone even joked that alchemists really do work wonders. The adventurers snatched up the vial with pure joy, kicked off the project's first stage, and then thanked the giver from the bottom of their hearts. A builder swung open the doors to a huge, beautiful house and basically dared Lifa and Kraft to move in. When the girl stumbled inside, she yelped in pure shock. She couldn't wrap her head around why she had to stay with Kraft, until he bluntly told her it was the biggest place they could find. Lifa stammered out an awkward mumble, and Kraft could only stare, guessing what had her blushing so hard. The young man guessed she'd be burdened by the chores, but the girl snapped back hard, demanding he stop making weird problems out of it. Kraft treated shared housing like it was totally normal for guildmates. But that easygoing attitude only left Lifa even more baffled. Blushing, she insisted they'd have to share a room too. Right there, it screamed something's off. The worker promised her the rooms would be split up inside and told the girl to breathe, calm down, right now. This building held the guild's temporary HQ, so nobody's going to break the rules of decency here. Lifa let out a shaky sigh of relief, but her cheeks still flared, because her own imagination had already gone way too far. Kyle burst onto the scene, and the girl laughed off the misunderstanding by pinning it on the employee. Then she buried Kraft in the sand, like a prank, and that stunt totally freaked the Lord out. To keep his mind off everything, Kyle pushed the idea of digging a well together, and swore to himself he'd never, ever mess with the explosive Lifa again. Even with an elixir that fueled his stamina, hauling water every day felt like a total waste, especially with a river right there. Kraft backed the idea like it was destiny. One solid well would make everyday life way easier, and Kyle could only hope the alchemist's skill would answer that prayer. Lifa didn't believe the aquifer would show up that easily, but the hero shot back that concentrated magic would cause a spring to burst straight up beneath their feet. Lifa snapped in shock, asking how some run-of-the-mill alchemist could call up a whole stream then. Kraft explained he trained in water magic and only later swapped the seal. Back then, the mage's crest pushed his mana so high it nearly burst. So now, with the Twilight seal in hand, he can draw it out clean and true, without losing a drop. Lif couldn't believe the bold confession, until the kid smirked and revealed he'd found an even better way to locate water. With a snap of his fingers, Kraft urged them to test the idea right there on the spot. Kyle and Lifa shot each other stunned looks, completely shocked that the alchemist actually knew those tricks. Lifa suddenly blurted out the Orvane's ancient method, and Kraft proved it on the spot by lifting the very stone he was about to turn into a drop. With a wild alchemical flash, the stone turned into a crystal-clear gemstone conductor that lit up the moment it sensed an underground vein. With a pendulum like that, finding water gets way easier, even without Kraft jumping in. But then a new problem slams down. To make a drop, you need a magical core. So Lifa pressed for answers. What exactly was the one thing they still didn't have? You need those mana stones the monsters drop. Each one's quality skyrockets or crashes based on the rank of the monster you just took down. Getting an orc-level crystal is brutal. Those guards refused to let Kyle go, and the mercenaries already packed up and vanished. Lifa proposed they stock up in the city, but the costs would have crushed them. So Kraft gritted his teeth and decided to hunt for supplies himself. His thoughts got smashed open when a wild man burst from the thicket, shouting that danger was coming. Deep in the wilds, they stumbled on a massive orc settlement, over 24 monsters packed inside, and it felt like a disaster blowing straight toward the villagers. Lifa nodded, saying 20 orcs are a real threat, but grabbing the ingredients is just as much part of the job. She declared she was ready to fight then. Kraft shocked everyone by volunteering to scout the enemy forces himself. The girl refused to buy into his plan. She had zero faith in that so-called weak mage, But the young man didn't bend an inch. He reminded Kyle that even if magic once crushed him, it still let him scout the area, spot herbs, and knock out 100 chores around the house. Craft's craft wasn't about flashy power. It was the scout's invisible grind, and he snatched that responsibility with full confidence. Lifa let out a heavy sigh, clocking just how skilled he was. Then he demanded she meet his eyes and put her trust in his plan. At the start of the journey, Kraft warned everyone to move with caution. Kyle practically begged him to stay careful, and Leif insisted no reckless moves. But the young man just clenched his fists like a vow, swearing he'd beat the goblin even without spells. As he shoved through thorny thickets, even that elixir of endurance couldn't stop the grind of fatigue. Mud sucked at his steps while branches raked his face. The foggy forest turned out to be pure danger. Strangers got jumped out of nowhere. And even before that, while Kraft hunted for a faster route, he kept gambling with getting hopelessly lost. A sudden crack snapped behind him. So he whipped around danger hiding in the tall thickets, and he cautiously peeked out from behind the bush. Right in front of me, an orc camp erupted into chaos. Fires hissed, the carcasses sizzled, and those green-skinned monsters ripped into the meat with their bare hands. The alchemist clocked 2 to 3 dozen orcs, perfect numbers to unleash his brand-new power in the real fight. That's why he demanded a solo recon. He wanted to push his alchemy magic to its limit and see what it could really do, even though his confidence still kept slipping. Those stiff, stone-faced comrades at the goodbye made it clear authority wasn't coming back through speeches. It was going to be forced back with facts. He used to bolt from every shred of danger, but today he trusts the Twilight emblem's power. Now escape is just his backup plan, not his only way out. The young man shot his hand forward, unleashed the ice prison of the underwater depths, and blasted a monowave straight into the enemy camp. In the blink of an eye, the whole settlement got trapped inside clear, glimmering ice blocks, shining like something out of a nightmare in the twilight. Kraft couldn't even blink. His eyes caught the first true offensive strike, and it instantly crippled 30 savage orcs. Yesterday, he could barely conjure a few drops of water, but today he stood there, staring in shock at his own frozen masterpiece. Gratitude surged through the young man for the herald. So this was what battle magic was supposed to feel like, and for a brief second, he pictured the shock on the royal court's faces. Then the joy shattered, an icy chill slammed in, and frost started crawling over his clothes, draining every last bit of warmth. He felt his own spell could freeze him solid, so he snatched up the scattered magical stones and bolted back. Even with the cold biting his skin, the thought of a raid that would actually succeed burned hotter than any fire. Kraft sprinted back to camp and told everyone the orcs were wiped out, then tossed a few sparkling gemstones into the dirt for his friends. Persia and Alfard immediately started plotting how to supercharge the defenses of the new lands with trophy mana cores. His first true solo run as the Twilight Alchemist ended in pure victory. He smashed the enemy, hauled in hard-won resources, and his team's belief in his power skyrocketed. The whole crowd went silent after the victory over 33 orcs, and even Kraft confessed he nearly froze solid into an ice statue from his own spell. When Lifa asked him, he shrugged and said, "I figured it out with magic," and the shock hit even harder because they'd kicked him out before for having ridiculously weak magic. The girl blurted out a frantic apology for snapping earlier, but she still couldn't wrap her head around how that kind of power suddenly woke up inside a magician who'd failed so hard. Kraft let the truth spill. This new Twilight emblem unlocked spells Kyle never thought were even possible. And Kyle cheered for him like a real close friend, pure and genuine. A young man kept dreaming of the day everyone would finally realize how effortlessly he was pulling out magical stones and how their lives would suddenly start climbing toward prosperity. With that kind of power at his back, he could dive back into the adventure. Life, but this time he didn't want to chase glory alone. He wanted to fight side by side with his comrades, grabbing the same wins together. Kraft snatched a stone pendulum from his hiding spot, winked at Kyle, and swore he'd track down a water source even better than the one that wiped out the orcs. He said, "When you hit the drop, that underground vein will flare up. Just walk, and tune in to the gemstones flicker." The moment he took a couple steps, the pendulum detonated in blinding light, and the alchemist, grinning with total confidence, jabbed the shovels toward the future well's location. The workers hacked away at the soil, but Lifa lunged in, yanked the spade from Kraft's hands, and snapped at him to finally rest after the night's chaos. An hour later, icy moisture splashed up from the dark pit, and Lifa burst into laughter as she slapped Kraft's hands together, thrilled by the first clean gush of water. The whole town rushed toward the racket, stunned that they'd tracked the source down on the very first try. Even more shocked it was the same guy who wiped out the orcs the day before. Now nobody had to fear thirst or enemies as long as the Twilight alchemist stayed in the village, because Lifa was already scheming to build a well. In just a few days, stone walls would cradle the well, and that crystal water would gush and gurgle so freely that everyone could finally breathe easy. The very next morning at breakfast, Kraft caught a soft, "good morning," and whipped around to see Mina flushed red, hiding behind her brother like she couldn't breathe. The shy girl planted a tiny pickaxe right in front of her. Daring the older ones to notice, then she asked, voice trembling, to be taught how to dig. The alchemist flashed a gentle smile, promising her the most comfortable grip, and Kyle couldn't help grinning as his sister took her very first step toward independence. Lifa bustled in with a tray of warm, freshly baked cookies, grinning as she teased Mina that her power wouldn't fade anytime soon, because the dough had a pinch of the legendary elixir hiding inside. With a warm smile, the Kraft thanked him, because even a single drop of his tincture turned those delicious breakfasts into pure, non-stop fuel for the whole squad. So the Dawn and Kaida burst in with smiles and fresh plans. Because the well was already gurgling, the soil was begging for the first sprouts, and everyone's hearts were itching to chase the next big win. Kraft barely caught her words before Kyle burst into excitement, realizing that for shy Mina even saying hello felt like a giant leap, and Kyle loved every second of it. Mina always cowered behind her brother, but her interest in Kraft ran way deeper than simple shyness. Yet he just brushed it off as the usual habit of noble girls. When Kyle found out Lifa was running the construction right now, he told the alchemist to lock in for the whole day experiments first, then the infusion prep. Even after the agreement, this weird tension stuck around like everyone kept hunting for a reason to break the awkward silence. Mina clung to the hem of his cloak, and when Kraft leaned in to urge her to speak up, her thoughts stayed locked behind her eyes. Persia awkwardly guessed the lady just wanted to hang near the alchemist, and he swallowed his doubts so he wouldn't turn it into a scene. For a split second, the young man's eyes locked onto the proud guard. Then he calmly snapped his gaze off them and threw himself back into his work. Persia stared in awe at his spatial storage again, while Kraft pulled out a few mana crystals, genuinely stunned by what he could do. He clenched the stone in his fist, ground it into bright powder, and dumped it into the giant vat of basic infusion. The alchemical stream whipped the liquid into a furious swirl, and even before any tests, you could feel that it was packed with raw, healing power. He suggested stashing the supplies in the pantry, and when he glanced over, he caught Mina's staring gaze lowered, totally spellbound by every move the master made. Persia was ready to yank the ward away, but the moment she saw how genuinely curious and innocent Kraft was, she let it slide. Then Kraft greeted her with a warm, kind smile. The alchemist blurted a warm compliment to the guard and told her to stay. Then that harmless little moment completely flustered her and threw her balance off. She blushed, shot a stern warning note playing around. She made it clear, yet a quiet, genuine kindness flashed behind her eyes. As the potion thickened, Mina yanked his sleeve again, like she was about to blurt out something huge. Kraft couldn't figure out why she was blushing, and Persia, barely smiling, just teased that the girl was falling harder and harder for the master. Once his work was done, he stared down those endless rows of barrels and knew that stash would carry him through any trouble that dared to pop up. A wild thought hit him, testing the medicine in real life, but he knew one thing: he wouldn't put a single person at risk. Loud shouts tore through the yard, yanking him from his thoughts, and the alchemist sprinted outside to see what had set everyone off. In the yard, workers carefully hauled the wounded young hunter, Jitaro, onto a stretcher, and as the crowd parted, everyone made room for the help rushing in. Jitaro's partner told him the hunter found a tiny pack of goblins, completely underestimated them, and dropped his guard. The leader finally exhaled when he learned the wounded one had already wiped out the rest of the animals. So the threat was completely gone. Kraft ordered every field worker to march to the camp, because the seasoned fighters had to hold the territory down until it was safe. An adventurer fired off a reminder about the fresh healing elixir, then handed Jutaro over to an alchemist who swore they'd step in and help. Kraft crouched over the wounds and found brutal deep cuts and torn flesh that screamed for immediate treatment. Persia couldn't believe the hunter didn't back off 6 goblins for no joke. Yet he still cheered the kid's courage anyway. She shoved aside useless questions and ordered the alchemist to treat those bloody cuts right now. Kraft poured basic healing mana into the wounds, spotted a tear in the artery, and knew he couldn't stall any longer. In his eyes, those basic army brews won't cut it. So he decides the only way forward is to test a brand new elixir. Diagnosis hit like a hammer. He'd suffered critical blood loss, the meds they tried to use weren't available, and there wasn't a healer anywhere nearby. It all hinged on a single shot, and Kraft was dead set on proving his remedy could work. Lifa hauled over a whole barrel of that greenish elixir, and the alchemist snatched up the ladle of thick liquid without even pausing. He poured the infusion straight onto the wounds and held his breath, praying the formula would finally work. The couple shot up through the clouds, smashing the world into blur then. For one terrifying second, it looked like the whole experiment had crashed and burned. Suddenly, Jutaro lunged onto the stretcher, stunned that the pain was gone, and that he felt lighter than he ever had. Wide-eyed, the hunter snapped his gaze to himself, checking every inch, no cracks, not a single one. Lifa couldn't even process it. Just a minute ago, he was one step from dying, and now he's standing there, perfectly unscathed. Jutaro bowed to the alchemist, grinning as the potion's power blew past even his wildest expectations. Kraft couldn't help but beam at the young man's rosy, healthy glow, but Lifa kept squinting, not fully convinced that the healing was truly natural, even with the hunter bragging about being fine. The alchemist shut him down and demanded rest, because the brutal blood loss was still screaming that he needed time to recover. Kraft pressed his fingers to the pulse and peered at the mucous membrane's color, staring in disbelief as the tincture snapped the blood back almost instantly. After the exam, he snapped that Jutaro must stay locked in bed until dawn, watching for any nasty complications that might pop up. Within a minute, the young man was raring to get to work in the field, but stern Persia snapped him back to caution and discipline. The workers stared in shock when the yesterday's dying man showed up swinging a hoe, then bragged that the elixir had snapped him upright in an instant. Persia saw how that herb could sharpen the army's strength, but the moment she did, she couldn't stop thinking about the political fallout it might ignite. She begged the alchemist to guard the secret with his life, warning him the whole tale was painfully delicate. So she pulled Kraft into her house for a secret talk, far from anyone's nosy ears. The guard rattled off, shaking with nerves, about the brutal rivalry around the Margrave's estate and its power sources, where every edge you gain costs you dearly. She warned that this kind of brutal potion could spark a whole new outbreak of war between the clans. The alchemist promised to guard the recipe like it was gold, and Lifa backed that choice. No secrets revealed until the true worth finally hits them. Persia promised she'd reach out to Kraft straight away if things got urgent, then quietly pushed back any reports that would have gone up the chain. She dashed back to Kyle and Mina's side, right as Lifa guided the teams to build that protective fence. The alchemist stared at the wounds, trying to crack where they came from, then decided to corner Jutaro, because this young hunter actually knew how to fight. Kraft couldn't believe it. Those regular goblins had wreaked this much damage on someone like him. Persia snapped into the alchemist's focus and let him dig into the clash's details himself, guiding his investigation from there. Out in the field, Kraft caught Jutaro in the act, and the guy practically buzzed with twice the energy, already bragging that he'd be off on the hunt any second. The alchemist grilled his doubts, did goblins really do this? And then he finally learned the old hunter's machete had snapped for good. He couldn't stop wondering how that steel snapped so fast, so he demanded to see the blade fragments. Jutaro shot back that the debris was in the shed, swore he'd clock out after he finished up, then promised a round of a few hundred push-ups and squats. In the workshop, Kraft leaned over the shattered blade, studied it hard, and instantly knew the break didn't come from metal fatigue at all. Lift fixed the Jutaro machete, Sure, but the blade still stayed brittle and basically useless. Kraft figured he could juice the weapon up with alchemy, since the storage was still packed with plenty of mana crystals. He grabbed a few stones and got to work, while the hunter bragged loud about how fast he'd bounced back. Jotaro ripped off his shirt and bared skin so smooth it was spotless, zero scars, sending his friends into shocked, amazed blurt after blurt. He demanded they don't underestimate Kraft's elixirs, swearing those infusions are a real miracle. The comrades laughed and reminded him that even miracle potions can't dodge pain, so the hunter had better be extra careful with every hunt. In Life's Forge, the furnace was only just starting to roar, and right then, an alchemist stepped up to her with a bold request. The girl swore she could fix any broken tool, and that was all it took for Kraft to throw himself into the experiment. He whipped out a flask brimming with a dark, oily brew alchemical oil made to harden metal. This hardening essence can crank up the power of any blade masters swear by it, and it totally blindsided Life. She swore that regular blacksmiths can only dream about a piece like this because only alchemists can make it. When Kraft heard that, his joy exploded. Turns out his creation was a material so rare it felt unreal. Lifa told them the olive's power isn't fixed, it swings based on the master's seal. And if you've got mana crystals, the effect hits absolute maximum. The alchemist admitted he can't do blacksmithing himself, so he practically hung on the guildmaster's every move, watching, even a small job like it was pure gold. The girl teased that the temporary forge was far from perfect, but she vowed to push even harder, and Kraft couldn't help but genuinely admire her. Grabbing a fresh olive, Lifa wrapped the blade in cloth and held it over the flame, tempering it with steady, careful hands. With a snap of momentum, Jotaro hefted his upgraded machete and, in a single vicious swing, cleaved a massive tree straight down, relishing every deadly strike. The hunter kept swinging his blade until Kraft finally barked, "Stop, this is getting dangerous." Lifa, burning with curiosity about what would happen next, lifted her weapon to the blazing sun and studied the edge with razor-focused care. The steel ended up insanely hard, so tough it didn't even scratch or chip yet. It still bent with that rare, mithril-level flexibility. Lifa realized this. If the blade was just hard, it would have shattered like glass, but this one somehow delivered a brutal strike, forged from the worst steel soaked in alchemical oil. Kraft told Lifa to try a fresh novelty, pulled out a flask from the second batch of olive oil, and that oil was getting cooked while Lifa was tempering the machete. Jotaro dragged that blade through a blackish liquid, convinced it was a rust shield, and the alchemist only grinned, then demanded he prove it works in action. The hunter slammed his freshly renewed blade down, and the tree cracked like brittle straw splinters blasted through the air in a furious storm. Thrilled, Kraft tore into loud applause after that last test. The hit landed way easier and cleaner than ever. Jotaro couldn't hold in his grin. Those logs were slicing through like glass now. But before the alchemist could even spill the oil's secrets, something wild blindsided them. Still not even measuring his own power, the young hunter swung once and down went a whole tree in a single blow, not even realizing the blade had already sliced straight through the trunk. For a few seconds, every single person went still, staring at the fallen giant in stunned silence. Then they all blew out a loud breath. Even though the boys were grinning at how lucky they were, Lifa's eyes narrowed because what sat before them wasn't just a machete anymore. It was a real battle relic, and it demanded strict control. She had a hunch it was the legendary olive of sharpness, and Kraft wasted no time confirming it, admitting that too much cheerfulness around that thing is straight up dangerous. The chief blacksmith barked a serious warning. No more jokes. One slip, and someone could get badly hurt. Then the alchemist bowed his head and apologized. Jotaro was buzzing with excitement, already dreaming up his next big feats, until Lifa hauled him up and made him swear to stay extra careful and keep the flashy cuts to a minimum. Even as she pleaded, the boy was already bolting to show off the blade, watching the workers stare in awe as the edge gleamed and sliced through logs like it was nothing. One lumberjack tried to swing, but the whole thing almost threw him off balance. So Lifa slapped her hands over her face, and demanded they stop those dangerous swings right now. She pressed Kraft for how long the effect would last. and he guessed it would burn for about a full day with normal use, or only half a day if she was going wild with intense chopping, even if you oil every last rural tool. That bottle is still guaranteed to hang on for a full week. The alchemist swore it, saying the crystals are stacked in stock. Lifa shot them a reminder. If they wanted to keep running these experiments, they'd need to dive into serious monster hunting to grab fresh stones. She yanked a promise out of Kraft and Jotaro on the spot, no warning, no mercy, demanding they stop any dangerous tests, then snapped a hard, warning look at Alvord while the sword stayed raised. Next morning, the alchemist dragged himself out of bed, wrecked from a whole night of work bags under his eyes. He stumbled to the well to splash some life back into his face. He was bursting with impatience, so he stormed out for fresh air, then paced, figuring out how to wrap up that batch of new elixirs and olives. Kraft tried to shake off the tension with a slow stroll, but right then, muffled moans leaked out of Kyle's room and froze him in place. He inched up to the crack, peered through, and saw the boy shaking in fever dreams, sweat-soaked, trembling, and clutching the blanket like it might save him. The scene clenched the hero's heart, and a sharp dread crawled in like thunder about to strike. Realizing things were about to explode, Kraft quietly summoned the young lord, praying he'd finally calm down. Suddenly, a warm hand clamped onto his shoulder. Persia was there, silently shooing the sleeping one not to stir. With a heavy heart, she told her that these attacks are just another brutal part of Kyle's day-to-day fight. The elixir of endurance buys him a few precious hours of relief, but once its power fades, the fever crashes back into his body. Kraft finally clocked how bad it was. This kid's body was paper thin, and every attack would strip him down to nothing, right to the edge. Persia told everyone that the doctors suspect a heart defect, but they still can't pin down the exact diagnosis, so for now, all that's left is protecting and caring for her with everything they've got. She sighed that all she could offer was raw strength and unwavering dedication, and it still wasn't even close to being enough to turn the situation around. Without any extra talk, Kraft took the alchemist's request straight on and promised Kyle right there that he'd do everything he possibly could. He took it as a personal dare and swore he'd craft a special brew strong enough to prop up a failing heart. That young lord had slipped into his life like a real brother, so backing down just wasn't an option. The hero dove into an ancient herbalist's book and learned the only cure-keeping plants grow in vicious, deadly swamps. That's why these medicines are so rare and ridiculously expensive. Tracking down all the ingredients is almost impossible. Right near Kraft, the closest swamp sat like a warning, and he took off to scout them out. Right at the forest's edge, he froze nightmare snakes writhed in tangled coils through the scruffy sedges. Thanks to that far-sighted magic, we could spot the predators from a safe distance. No need to get anywhere near them. Rising above the rest, the seven-headed hydras ruled the swamp, looming and patrolling like brutal living towers. The alchemist clocked it instantly. There was no way he'd snatch those coveted herbs unnoticed, because every hydra was guarding a whole stretch of swamp. Back in the village, Kraft caught up with Lifa and told her he'd gone hunting for herbs for a brand new elixir only to come up empty, because he couldn't get them from those swamps. Plants will only sprout in those marshes where terrifying hydras rule. Yet the hero still can't figure out why, no matter how hard he tries. At lunch, he clocked it. These monsters kept their sights far wider than he expected, and no one strike could drop them. So Lifa winced with worried dread. The hero caught the spark in her mood. Hydras thrive in swamps, and she even apologized for how wildly she felt. She reminded everyone that long ago, dwarves had built a settlement right here. Then hydras wreaked havoc and wiped the whole place out. With fists clenched tight, Lifa snapped. Everything's way more tangled than it looks at first glance. The whole world fell because those top-tier predators unleashed non-stop raids, and wave after wave crushed everything. Kraft was stunned. Hydras almost never crawl out of those swamps, so seeing a whole pack launch an attack felt totally unheard of. The girl barely managed to hold her emotions in check as she admitted the monsters were still showing up in the area. The hero leaned in with real sincerity, fully getting her pain like it was his own. Even with danger screaming in his face, he went hunting for herbs, again ready to bring the smallest group possible so he wouldn't set off a fight. Lifa snapped his clothes in her grip and blurted that she'd go with him, swearing she wouldn't drag them down. Kraft told her to be careful, but she only flashed a smile like reminding him he'd once been an adventurer himself. She promised she'd follow every instruction without question. And the hero shot back a bright, matching smile. Then they rallied everyone and pulled the rest of the team together for a quick, daring expedition. Inside the workers' house, Kraft laid out the whole expedition plan, then deliberately left Kyle's illness out of the story, making it crystal clear that they only needed volunteers. Persia stepped back, lost in thought, while everyone else hesitated, afraid to lift their hands. In the end, she blurted out, "Yes," and Alphard froze in shock, then immediately stepped up and promised to watch the children while she was gone. The girl thanked him and promised she'd be back fast. Then Alphard took the responsibility on the chin. No arguments. Jotaro jumped at the chance to join too, but Kraft couldn't shake the worry from those quiet, uneasy looks. His companions kept stealing at Jotaro's safety. Jotaro shot them a calm smile and promised, "I'll stay back," then planted his feet and kept distance with a bow while Lifa and Persia, the older sister, dug in at the front and shielded Mage Kraft. The alchemist nodded. "Four is enough, just move together." But Lifa kept darting worried looks at her friend's weapons. Before they took off, Kraft barked a reminder, "Pack light only what you truly need, because everything goes into the spatial storage, so escaping the quagmire is easy." Persia stayed locked in her guard's usual light armor, but that non-stop, eagle-eyed stare from the alchemist made her irritation simmer. This time Leif rocked almost full armor and swung a massive hammer in his hands. Kraft couldn't believe it. He couldn't stop worrying about her mobility. But she grinned and promised him the gear's weight wouldn't slow her down one bit when it was time to prove her skills. To shut down every doubt, she darted through a few slick moves, and Kraft immediately swallowed his pride and apologized for mistrusting her. Jotaro bragged like he had the best outfit in town, but he looked straight out of a wild bandit crew, so the alchemist told him to quit the act and at least take off the blindfold. He also made sure they oiled the arrows, sharpening every tip so each shot would land dead on and lethal. When their plan blows up, they can always run it back, but Kraft made the band move carefully, refusing to gamble on needless risks. Persia finally admitted it. These tricks only show up in the military as a true last resort. And this time, they're stuck gambling on elixirs and oil. Hearing that, the alchemist snapped, "Don't stall. When lives are on the line, there'll be plenty of materials, and the danger is worth it." The words hit the guard like a wave of certainty, and for the first time, she smiled at Kraft, for real, radiating pure trust. Jotaro, as always, bombarded Persia with older sister compliments, and it nearly sent her into a full-blown boil. They picked the route with the fewest hydras, because one loud clash or a heavy spell could rouse fresh monsters out of the dark. Lifa rips the hydra's attention off the front. Persia sneaks in from behind. Jotaro rains cover from afar, and Kraft steps up with magic to seal the win. After we snagged the herbs, we didn't even think we tore out fast. No time to waste. Suddenly, Lifa snapped to attention. Out of the marshes came a dry, hissing warning, and it screamed, "Danger." She shushed them somewhere close. A hungry predator was sneaking through the reeds, rustling with every step. In a blink, everything clicked. The giant hydra had its claws and coils locked on a giant crocodile, squeezing it to the point of choking as it lined up to strangle the poor thing before lunch. Lifa crept up on the hydra in total silence, crouching behind a trunk as the snake-like heads ripped into their prey like they couldn't get enough. Right after the girl's signal, everyone cracked open their shelters to take a look, and then it hit them. Way more monsters than Jotaro expected. Kraft immediately pushed for a silent retreat. Even so, the team tested their limits, locked in the plan anyway, and put their trust in Lifa's resistance. She slammed straight in, smashing the hydra's giant head with a blacksmith's hammer and making the serpent jerk back in shock. Jotaro gapes as Lifa, smaller than the monster but towering in spirit, stops its charge. Cold, proving those iron muscles and deadly clean technique. Her craftsman's emblem never stopped. Her years of training forged the blacksmith into a terrifying warrior. Persia smeared the blade with oil of sharpness and charged for the flank while the hydra stayed busy, and Lifa held its attention. One brutal phoenix wing cleaved through the air, and those scales looked paper-thin like dried, ancient bark. The monster's bare neck couldn't take it for a second. The massive hydra's head dropped without a sound straight into the swamp mire. The massive body lurched and finally dropped nearby, and Lifa calmly slid back a step just in time to dodge the shifting ground. Jitaro, drunk on pure euphoria, bolted toward the severed carcass, totally mesmerized by how the allies' blades flashed like lightning. Persia stared into the sword's gleaming blade and saw that mirror edge then. The steel slid through flesh like it was warm butter. The hunter yanked a shimmering mana crystal straight from the wound, and Lifa and Kraft locked eyes, sizing up the treasure like hawks. The blacksmith's hands practically crackled with excitement. She let out a quiet laugh, like she was desperately holding back an explosion of pure joy. Suddenly, like she'd snapped, Lifa launched forward, leaving her companion staring in shock and blasting a trail of muddy splashes behind her. Persia and Kraft sprinted after them, snapping orders to Jitaro to stay right beside them and keep the far flanks covered. She spun forward, hammer blazing through the air, and with a burst of laughter, the second Hydra crumpled too stunned to even move. The comrades stood there bracing in panic as their friend's seizure ripped out of control. Every savage bayonet strike tore off full layers of snake flesh. Power left life swaying like it was drunk. One more strike, another head drops, and muddy water explodes into steam. Her face lit up with pure joy, but her friends' fear hit hard because they knew the next battle could blow up beyond control and take their whole group down with it. Persia and Lifa spun again and again inside the Phoenix whirlwind, while Kraft and Jitaro could only stare, stunned and hooked. One Hydra spotted how strong the opponents really were, then bolted for its life. Lifa sprinted after him, flinging a threat over her shoulder. "You're not getting away." Right in front of her comrades, she ripped that monster apart in the blink of an eye. Snakeskin strips lashed the marsh so hard they almost knocked Jitaro's warning out of his own mouth, telling Kraft to watch himself, while the alchemist just waved off the whole show like it meant nothing. In just minutes, that swamp sprouted a whole mountain of torn hydras. Lifa and Persia finally gulped in some air, then spun around and locked eyes with their friends' stunned, wide-open stares. One glance from her sent a cold shiver through Kraft and Jitaro. Sheer intimidation radiated off that blacksmith like a warning. Lifa shot an apology for wrecking the plan, but her partners didn't even flinch, because the end result was downright impressive. She joyfully confessed that she'd finally struck back and avenged her ruined homeland. At least a little. The warm sparkle of happiness in the girl's eyes genuinely delighted Kraft. Persia also wanted to thank the alchemist. While Lifa was fighting monsters, she still needed to hold the line, and without his help, that would have been impossible. Kraft waved it off with a joke, but that compliment totally rocked Persia. Her face flamed red as she scrambled for words. Jitaro snapped them back to reality. Turns out they never even gathered the herbs. Persia, wobbling on the edge of blurting something about Kyle's illness, bit her tongue just in time, and Kraft quickly threw the conversation somewhere else. He demanded they stop the rumors, and the hunter shot him a suspicious look, then clammed up and said nothing. Spinning around, the alchemist mixed the legendary elixir of ailments, and now it was time to see if it truly worked. Lifa said the potion should be safe, but the missing clinic screamed trouble. Kraft even drank it the day before, and still felt zero side effects. Just then, Persia burst in, eyes wide with worry, and demanded, "Is the panacea ready?" Then she doubled down. She'd even brave a cold under the waterfall just to make sure it worked. In Kraft's head, a jolt of imagination showed a naked girl under a cold, icy stream. But Lifa's hard stare snapped him back into reality in an instant. Persia blurted out that she'd drilled under a waterfall for years and had never once caught a sickness. So this experiment was a complete waste, yet the alchemist snapped back in rage, demanding they grab another volunteer. And just then the young courier burst in and called Persia's name to Kyle. The moment hit like a shockwave. Everyone froze, went dead silent, and stared at the smiling Kyle. He spotted a line of bottles on the table and, with a curious reach, thrust his hand forward as anxious Persia pleaded for the young lord. Kyle's gut told him right away those new infusions were made just for him. Kraft stepped up and confirmed that these were real healing elixirs, and the boy bowed with heartfelt gratitude, thanking the alchemist for every ounce of care. Kyle didn't even wait for permission. He snatched a bottle and guzzled the whole thing in one go. The sheer audacity left everyone speechless, but the boy simply exhaled in relief. Everyone surged to stop him cold because that potion hadn't been tested yet, even if the estimates said it was safe. The young lord stood tall and said, "I trust my faith and my courage, so bring on the risk. I'm not scared." Minutes later, he burst out, smiling like a sunrise, saying he finally felt a ton better, and seeing Persia and Alfred break down in tears of pure joy. Talifa clocked that Kraft didn't get swept up in the buzz he just slipped toward the exit in silence. He stormed back, locked eyes with Kyle, and demanded he stop pretending. The guards blinked in disbelief, and Kyle swore he'd truly recovered. But the alchemist refused to trust it until he personally verified the truth. Disappointment hit the Lord so hard his face went deathly pale, because Kraft had seriously demanded he not lie. The alchemist snapped that this fake miracle stunt would set everyone up for false hope and poison the whole community. Persia and Alfred couldn't figure out why the magician's mood flipped so fast, and rage instantly surged as they seized at what he did. Kraft shot Persia an apology, then admitted he was only half convinced the infusion could beat Kyle's lifelong illness. That elixir truly wipes out colds, knocks down infections, and even helps fend off other acquired diseases. But with the cruel violations the child is born with, that cure is suddenly anything but certain. Even the most battle-tested doctors throw up their hands at this heart defect, so one single dose of potion won't magically fix it all. Tears glittered in Persia's eyes, but Alfred's gentle touch soothed her, because he knew the real solution was waiting just up ahead. Kraft had the spark of an idea, but he told everyone, bright as Alfred soothed a buzzing, excited Persia, that it would take time. The alchemist bowed his head and apologized to Kyle, then handed him only elixirs of endurance. For now Kyle nodded, agreed, and swore he'd stop twisting the truth. Kraft grinned, grabbed his courage to head out, but his friends yanked him back, demanding answers and clearing up the whole situation first. Persia blurted out an apology for the scream, still shaken to the core, and Kraft shot back that he wasn't holding a grudge. Because emotions happen. She handed him the settlement's safety and Kyle's life, and the alchemist snapped it into his grasp. The girl clamped her hand around his, guiding the Lord to collapse while everyone else bought the lie that even the legendary potion couldn't fail. No doctors are anywhere near, and even the Margrave's medics can't do a thing against that strange congenital heart defect. Kraft still clings to hope that this upgraded formula finally works, because if it doesn't, they'll be forced to dig into darker, far more dangerous methods. Right now, the resilience elixirs only boost the body, buying everyone precious time to rebuild the settlement and hammer their defenses into something unbreakable. He pitched the idea of starting his own adventurer guild to pull in defenders and reel in the resources they needed. Lifa blinked in surprise, then nodded, because strong warriors, shops, and housing would be needed here sooner or later anyway. The alchemist slammed down a record and swore there's a potion that will absolutely wipe out Kyle's sickness. Those life-saving herbs only grow in far-off lands, and the rest of the rare stuff? You don't find it, you rip it out of monster battles. He yanked open the herbal book and jabbed at the picture of the exact plants they needed. The book claims these herbs grow only in the underground layers where dragons make their homes. Kraft shoved Kyle to wait a little longer because he was sure he'd find the cure. Meanwhile, a brand new caravan group finally pushed through their endless, exhausting journey and slammed right up to the borders. As they trekked through the land of monsters, they kept swatting away monster after monster, so. Of course they paid for armed guards to stand their ground. One of the laborers stammered, scared out of his mind, saying those miserable shacks were waiting up ahead, and when the guide slammed on the brakes, he still managed to bump his forehead. The travelers stared in disbelief. Right in front of them was a real city, packed with nearly 30,000 people, buzzing with life and exploding with growth. They tore through every building, baffled beyond belief, because somehow they'd wound up in this village, where they even found a well pouring out clean water. Lifa met the newcomers at the border and snapped, "Remember, this place has only been under development for 6 months." She flashed a smile and declared that seasoned masters had all come together, then told everyone they'd forge an exemplary settlement, and the guests erupted in agreement. Kraft watched the village spark awake like the guild's master plan just clicked, with pioneers and thrill-seekers flooding in. Reddick, the young knight in shining armor, skidded up to Kraft and erupted with joy at the totally unexpected reunion. They'd been traveling together as a team, so the alchemist assumed his partner was keeping watch over the caravan. But Reddick stayed for a totally different reason. Grinning from ear to ear, he announced that he was staying right here, serving the village from now on, and he couldn't wait to watch his shocked friends' reaction. When they asked why, the knight just shrugged and said, "Because there are monsters everywhere, and with the new settlement, we've got supplies right here." Blushing hard, Reddick confessed he regretted Kraft's leaving, then the guilt vanished just as fast. At the start, they clung together and grew close, but soon the group packed up and left the mage behind, kicking off a brutal chain of painful goodbyes. Kraft felt the weight of it crush him, and he fled beside his companions like a runaway nobody could match, falling behind the moment the pace surged. Switching from team to team, he kept running into the same grim ending, and now those memories hit him like cold electricity, chilling him to the bone. Reddick snapped the truth into place that this imbalance was choking everyone, so they had to say goodbye, even though every single one of them hated the idea. On top of that self-proclaimed mage label, Kraft got hit with a taunting nickname he didn't even recognize. The knight reported in a quiet voice, and the new arrivals, swallowing their nerves, called him the mentor of beginners, but they could never say it to his face. Kraft's patience was the reason they grew, but when they tossed him out, guilt hit so hard that they never once owned up to it. The alchemist stared into their past every shared step, every hard-won memory, and the truth finally clicked. They were seeing exactly what had been happening behind those choices. He could barely believe it, but the look on his old friends' faces screamed one thing: pure, undeniable embarrassment. Kraft thought his adventures led to nothing. Then he finally saw it. There are people who truly value what he's done. Reddick stared at his friend, wondering how many more secrets were still trapped behind silence, and maybe it was time to tear that silence down and rewrite their stories together. Reddick decided the only retribution that mattered was this. He threw himself into rebuilding the new settlement with ruthless dedication. With a firm shake of Kraft's hand, he demanded that the group trust him with any task they needed. The village exploded in size, and it all kicked off when the Adventurers Guild opened its doors. These lands have been crawling with monsters for ages, so hunters flooded in and stayed for years, chasing serious money with every hunt. Right alongside them, a thriving business sprang up to meet the brand new needs of the newcomers. Every single day, more and more people surged in, and Lifa was already bowing and apologizing. Because there weren't enough rooms to go around, every craftsman sprinted to help build the hotel, and still somehow the workers barely kept pace with the non-stop demand. A massive line stretched in front of the shop, packed with elixirs and weapons, and the shoving and shouting kept ratcheting up until it felt like a roar. Some people demanded the olive of sharpness. Others begged for healing herbs, and the owner of Salora kept apologizing as the shelves stayed painfully empty. Her politeness melted the tension, and even someone pushed aside just to steal a look at that charming smile. The young adventurer clutched his head. No olives left at all. A friend leaned in and offered to lend some, but only if he joined the hunt for hydras, and the deal was made on the spot. That's when Kyle shot a call to Kraft and demanded a conversation. In the conference room, the alchemist slid tea in front of everyone and pressed for what the whole meeting was really about. Kyle sat beside Mina and declared, "All right, time to name this settlement." Kraft blinked in disbelief that they were still unnamed. But the young man didn't joke around for a second. Every time they tried to build it, it collapsed so fast that nobody dared even dream of giving it a name. The alchemist teased with Kylivka, and right after that, Persia and Alfard pushed the very same idea too. The locals were praising the Lord's greatness, so that kind of name fit perfectly. Persia nodded so hard she nearly toppled over. Kyle himself snapped, "This settlement was built by all of us, so it can't carry only my name. We need something everyone shares." Persia let out a heavy sigh. No choices. Not right now yet. Kraft got it instantly. Arguing wouldn't change anything, so he'd have to hunt down a brand new name worthy of the moment. The hero spun to Kyle's younger sister for answers, and Mina blurted out of nowhere, that the settlement should be called Kraft Villa. But Kraft just shrugged it off like it was nothing. Kyle clapped with excitement. praising his sister's clever idea until the alchemist brushed it aside and pushed for a different route, even dropping Lafana as a tribute to the guild leader. While Mina dug in her heels and refused to budge, the Lord flat out said the credit belongs to Craft. And that name fits perfectly, yet the alchemist, seething with shame, refused to accept it. Persia muttered about it but still swallowed the master's order. Until Craft snapped, "You worthless chatterbox," and she nearly choked him to death in a furious hug. A sharp knock hit the door. Leafa rushed in, snapped an apology for interrupting, froze when she saw the alchemist sprawled on the floor, and then hesitated, but he insisted she stay. Plopping down at the table, the blacksmith slid right into the brainstorming and, before anyone could blink, pitched the name asterisk, Twilight Village. Persia frowned because decline sounded doomed, yet Leafa, grinning, stared straight at the emblem of the Twilight Alchemist. She leaned in and said, "It's the Craft seal that keeps this settlement alive, so the name isn't random. It's a reminder of the role that changed everything." The alchemist hesitated. Then Persia snapped to attention and agreed on the spot. That gloomy symbolism fits the borderland perfectly, even if it sends faint shivers of what's coming. Kyle leaned in, lit up with his idea, and tossed out asterisk, Dawn Village, a brand new beginning where each sunrise promises a fresh lift. Lifa said, "Dawn looks gorgeous on a fortress raised from nothing." And Persia dropped to one knee before choosing the Lord. The girls snapped their eyes to Mina, and with rosy cheeks she nodded. Because yeah, she loved the Dawn too, so it's official starting now. Their home gets a brand new name, Dawn Village. Persia lit up and declared that the name gleamed like pure gold and fit Hilo's spirit perfectly, while Craft just awkwardly scratched the back of his head. Leafa headed off to sort the paperwork, and Kyle trailed after her, grinning as he whispered that he still dreamed of the Craft Villa, while the alchemist completely feigned he hadn't heard a word. Later on, Craft decided the next extraction raid couldn't wait, so he hauled himself to Leafa to hash out every detail. Inside her forge, he spotted a girl shuffling papers, and he wasted no time. He laid it all out. They needed another expedition to hunt down more ore. The resource list hit like a fantasy jackpot: iron, copper, mithril, and if fate smiled, even adamantium. The alchemist snapped the map open, jabbed a finger at a big cross on the page, and the guild's forecasts promised that right there was where the rare veins were most likely to be. When she heard those words, Leafa drained of color, and the papers in her grip started to shake on their own. Cold sweat drenched Leafa. She knew exactly why she couldn't risk that marked mine. And Craft watched her fear like he was reading the truth off her skin. The alchemist pushed for it to be arranged through the Adventurers Guild, paid straight from the Dawn's budget. They planned to mine the ore with steel picks, then they'd supercharge them with hardening oil, coat them in sharpness oil, and even a life dwarf would guide the way to the veins. That girl shot a suspicious look and knew it. Craft was hiding something, plain and simple. He threw out a quick apology, swore the on-site test he wanted to run was totally safe, and called it just a small alchemical experiment. Soon, they huddled up and formed a team, and Leafa never once tore her gaze from Craft like she was hunting for the exact moment he'd strike out of nowhere. Reddick clutched the alchemist's hand and blurted out, "Thanks for the trust." Chitero even shocked everyone by volunteering to tag along, and Craft just shrugged and agreed. Because in that forest, there's no such thing as too much bow. So they launch into the harvest for ore, because this first move is the key to saving Kyle. Reddick laughed off a hunch that Leafa is secretly watching the alchemist, and when he asked about it, Leafa just shrugged and said, "There are reasons." On the way, the leader called for a quick roll call to bring the whole team back into sync. Reddick is a swordsman who proudly wears the knight's coat of arms, and Leafa is stunned when she recognizes Craft's old partner. Then they brought in Soul, a no-nonsense ranger with eyes that cut straight through you. She muttered that she was sorry for her terrible eyes and gave a quick, stiff nod like she meant it. Reddick bragged that her character was made of steel, and Soul shot him an annoyed glare. Craft grinned, and you could tell a long time had flown since their joint raids. Even when that alchemist tried to sympathize with Soul, Reddick stayed one step ahead. So, Kraft finally clocked it. The girl's feelings weren't for Saul at all. They were aimed straight at the swordsman. Saul, a little shy, clasped Kraft's hand and blurted out that she was thrilled to team up. Reddick leaned in and kept going biful. That slender healer is a priest. Mess. The mage draped in black. Faces Graham the warrior who's towering there with an axe in hand. Everyone nodded hard, and Kraft locked their roles into his mind, like he could already see the plan unfolding. The squad huddled up and charged toward the marked cross ridge because rare metals were calling. Deadly traps lurked around every corner, and there was a real chance they'd find medicine for the young lord too. Priest Byfall beamed and clasped Kraft's hand, and right from that first handshake, the whole moment felt warm and genuine, even without a staff. Mage Mess still unleashed magic like a pro. Kraft couldn't stop staring, totally blown away. Warrior Graham Broad, bulky and dead quiet, gave nothing but a hard nod, like talking was the last thing he wanted. Jitaro lunged ahead, announced he was a hunter, and promised he'd happily help everyone. Reddick laughed like this guy had been yanked off the street, but Jitaro swore he was dressed in the best hunting gear money could buy. Kraft pumped up the young man, even as he admitted the wandering bandit look hadn't vanished, because the group's laughter just kept hammering those jokes home. After a quick intro, the squad barreled deeper into the forest, mowing down little monsters as they went. Reddick demanded to know if they could scoop up every dropped piece, and Leafa snapped back, "Yeah, the loot goes to whoever earns it in the fight." Kraft couldn't believe it. The team was blowing past his expectations and moving way faster than he thought they could. Reddick swore his wins came from the elixirs of endurance, and Saul chimed in that with them in her system, she can fire arrow after arrow non-stop. The alchemist pulled out a tiny vial of manapone, a rare elixir that could slam mana back into someone's veins. Everyone's frozen in shock. Tat legendary drink is up for free giveaways, and Kraft can't afford to waste a drop. There's barely any liquid to begin with. Reddick chuckled and said even a cyclops isn't scary anymore, and Kraft quickly snapped, "Don't let your imagination run wild." Pushing through the brambles, Leafa was the first to spot the tiny secret opening to the cave. The alchemist froze for a second, then the girl revealed it. That glowing drop pendulum lit up hotter and hotter, because the ore was right there. Kraft and Mess blasted spheres of light that flooded the damp passage walls with glow. Leafa didn't even notice. The column crept forward behind her with bated breath. At first, the grottos looked deserted, but those cramped passages shoved them shoulder to shoulder. Drops hammered the ceiling. Lizards skittered along the walls. Saul pleaded with Reddick to stop, and Reddick shot back an apology. Leafa trusted the gnome's sight and the glow of the drop, then marched her squad straight into the pitch black, because the veins everyone dreamed of were waiting under the earth's stone heart. Leafa scanned the ground under her feet while Kraft smiled like, "Perfect, you're carrying everything," and quietly prayed this cave didn't turn into some nasty dungeon. Reddick leaned in and reassured him, "No foreign aura, this is just a plain natural cave, not some real dungeon. Dangerous monsters usually lurk in dungeons, but that's exactly why the rarest, most valuable artifacts end up there too. And it's no surprise treasure hunters spent their whole lives dreaming of one day stepping inside. As they pushed deeper into the cave, it opened up around them. Then Reddick slammed on the brakes and Kraft felt it too. Something was lurking just ahead. To their left, 3 stone lizards sat there. Kraft totally missed the massive things, with skin tougher than a bull's hide. Reddick snapped out orders. Graham leads the charge. Saul holds the rear line, and the rest back the raiders from the shadows. Graham braced a shield to block the incoming blow, and the lizard exploded forward, jaws gaping wide as it charged. The monster got hit so hard its shield staggered, and it got flung backward, scraping across the stone floor like claws on gravel. The salt bit down on the bowstring and snapped it loose. Sure, they're tough, but they're still just lizards. Now watch them face her arrows. She slicked the blade tips with razor oil and launched it straight for the largest one's head. The arrow tore through the monster's skull like it was nothing but glass. Reddick burst out, fired up and grinning, saying everyone was crushing it. Saul nodded right along, because these monsters were no match for them. With Graham at his side, they kept cleaning house-dropping monsters left and right without the slightest hesitation. With a few more savage strikes, every last lizard crumpled to the ground, completely helpless. Saul locked in, whipped around to Reddick, and stared down the wreckage, then confirmed it with one hard look. The fight was done. Time to snatch the materials fast and push forward. Kraft watched from the sidelines and grinned, because the team was moving like one perfect unit. Back then, with a totally different coat of arms, he rode with them too, scrambling to learn anything he could. Now, his life as an adventurer feels like it belongs to a past world, like a memory pulled from another era entirely. Reddick grinned and said those lizards weren't even a real threat, and Kraft shot back that if he hadn't stepped in, the newcomers would have bolted ages ago. Reddick burst into a laugh and said the oil's sharp edge had done exactly what it promised. Don't ever underestimate it. Saul's arrows were lethal, but Graham's axe sliced through those armored lizards like a kitchen knife cutting butter. Kraft groaned, and finally caved. Reddick was right, because once that new coat of arms went up, he'd truly changed. Even so, the swordsman warned, don't get comfortable just because you've got a coat of arms. One day I'll personally test what the Twilight alchemist can really do. Deeper into the rubble, Leafa spotted it. The rock type had changed, and among the mountain debris, pale flecks of metal shimmered like they were calling her name. Her gut screamed, Mithril. And it stunned Reddick. He was already picturing armor forged from that miracle metal. With the vein's concentration running low, the girl urged them to dive even deeper, and Kraft snapped right on board. After a few dozen steps, the drop flared brighter, and Leafa snapped her hand up to halt the squad, because just ahead, a huge open hall yawned before them. She lunged ahead first, shouting for the others to come check out the discovery. Their forgers' eyes burned with intensity. Every inch of that massive chamber was blanketed in sharp, crystalline spires. Leafa sprinted straight for the nearest boulder, and Kraft, glancing back, could barely believe what he was seeing. Everyone, even Reddick, strode between those glittering pillars, staring in stunned awe, because their wild dreams of Mithril were finally turning real. The alchemist showered the blacksmith with praise for her incredible work, and Leafa was already daydreaming about what priceless blades she'd set out to forge with all that treasure. The capture got ripped apart by a violent tremor. Then a giant eye flashed to life in the dark. Reddick screamed at Leafa to bolt. From the shadows, a monstrous roar tore loose, and a blank, toothy giant came charging straight at the girl. In the blink of an eye, the Cyclops, built like a tank, swinging a massive mace, was right on top of him, deadly close. The monster crouched in the hall's darkest shadows, stalking its next victim. Then one glowing eye flared with pure, ravenous greed. It lifted the stick high, lining up the deadly swing to crush that tiny blacksmith. Reddick sprang forward, slammed his shield in front of Leafa, shoved her back, and barked at her to retreat. Looking back, he slammed Graham into motion to back the front line while Sol and Leafa darted to a safer distance. Mage Mess was already cracking together a battle spell while Byfall raised a supportive prayer, because the fight with the Lord of the Cave had just kicked off. Everyone formed a line and Reddick roared, "To battle!" Graham swung his massive axe, then the blade skated right off the Cyclops' skin like it was made of tough horned armor. Kraft froze because the hit landed, and somehow, it didn't even scratch him. The one-eyed giant twisted out of the way and snapped back. Then a huge mace arm slammed toward the squad, blasting them back with no time to breathe. Graham threw up his shield, but the impact hit like a freight train, slamming him backward and dumping him hard onto the rocky floor like he weighed nothing. Reddick shot his friend a reach, but Kraft slammed a hand on his shoulder and cut him off. "I've got this." He barked for Bipala to fire off a spell, then sprinted straight to the unconscious warrior. The alchemist yanked a whole vial of that legendary potion and splattered it on Graham's wounds. Thick, roaring vapor instantly swallowed his body. In seconds, the wound sealed up. Then the warrior shot upright, flexed his arms, and stared at the healer in pure disbelief. Shield clenched tight. He charged back into the fight, and when Reddick saw it, he blurted, "Kraft's potions are the real miracle." The Cyclops ended up freakishly quick, snapping into motion. "Salt. Aye. That's our target." The swordsman roared. The ranger's wounds started closing, but the monster was already too fast. There was no way to line up a shot. Reddick lunged to slice the tendon in his leg, but the Cyclops darted out of the way with a nimble hop, taunting him like it was all a joke. The mace screamed through the air again, and with every hit, the fight tilted even harder, like it had already decided its winner. Kraft shot that thought through his head. We're going to lose, as he frantically tore through spells because fire and wind would shred him in that tight cave, and he still couldn't land earth magic worth a damn. So he lifted his hand bearing the coat of arms and chose to gamble everything. As the comrade spun around, icy crystals exploded around Kraft, snapping together into a sharp, faceted spear in the blink of an eye. With a razor whistle, the icy wolf fang rocketed forward, and before the Cyclops could even blink, it slammed straight through his ribcage. The monster froze mid-motion, an icy stinger jutted from its wound, and ice snapped outward in an instant, sealing everything in a hard crust. The whole squad froze in pure shock because Kraft had just unleashed magic they'd never seen before. Reddick yanked his sword up. Saul, aim. Graham, cover. And the trio surged beneath the brutal slash as the ranger snapped the bowstring back, lining up the finishing blow. Reddick dodged and slashed the Cyclops' massive arm with the storm blade, then followed through with Wolf's hot strikes. Together with Saul, they launched onto the monster's torso and tore into the joint dissection of the rock, and right then the ranger found the perfect line and loosed an arrow straight into. The eye snapped open. Cyclops froze mid-stare, then swayed and started to topple, while Reddick screamed at everyone to back up. Back, and the giant's icy leftovers smashed into the ground with a thunderous roar. For a few tense seconds, the squad froze and stared at the fallen enemy until it finally clicked. With victory in hand, Reddick yanked Kraft in close by the shoulders and blurted, "We did it!" And Graham grinned too, though his words came out all jumbled and hard to catch. Jotaro felt proud they'd crushed that monster, and Leafa sprang up shouting, "What strength!" While Biful threw praise at the team non-stop. Kraft shrugged and said, "It was just your coordination." But Soul shot back, "Without your Ice Fang, we'd still be stuck trading moves with that brute." Reddick jerked his chin and demanded, "Confess, what new sorcery is this?" Because the second his eyes drifted off, the alchemist unleashed magic no one saw coming. Salt seriously said Kraft's attack ended it for good, and they only had to finish the frozen target off. The alchemist burst out laughing with pure relief because his worthless magic finally proved it could actually do something. Leafa declared it was safe to finally start mining the ore, and Reddick nodded like, "That's the whole reason we came here." While the warriors hacked valuable materials off the carcass, Kraft and Leafa huddled close, trading sharp words. Prey Graham licked his lips, picturing armor forged from cyclopean flesh, while Bifal pinched his nose, gagging at the sharp stench of blood. Leafa shot Kraft a wave, and there she stood with a pickaxe ready, itching to tear into the mithril and whatever other ores she could grab. After a while, the blacksmith jammed ore into 4 barrels, but his hunger for more still burned. Trying to smash that inner wall was brutal. No ordinary pickaxe could bite through the rock at all. "All right, let's roll out the secret weapon," Kraft said, yanking free a weird metal cylinder. Leafa squinted. "What is this supposed to be?" And he shot back, "An alchemical explosive charge. A mana detonator re-trigger on command." "Stop, this is insane," the girl blurted out. Kraft just grinned and said, "As long as we don't touch the Heartstone, we're safe." "Tiu," the gave. Leafa shot him a furious look and cut him off, warning that the invention had never been tested, but Kraft just shrugged it off and said it was totally safe. The girl demanded everyone back from the rocky outcrop, but Jotaro was practically bouncing with impatience, and Kraft kept blurting, "It's nothing serious." Reddick braced for the worst, stunned by all this panic, because the alchemist had already pulled off miracles before. But Leafa leaned in and said, "You don't know his reckless side yet." She begged him to remember every word, and once Kraft had rounded everyone up, he swore, "The power in the charge hits like a firecracker." He shoved the cylinder into that razor-thin crack, started the countdown with a grin, and soaked up the blacksmith's terrified stare. The whole team snapped their hands over their ears, bracing for the thunderous bang. 1. And boom! A deafening blast ripped through the cave, blasting echoes into every dark corner. A surge of force ripped through the ground, kicked up a cloud of dust, and Leafa and Saul snapped their eyes shut as tiny stones clattered onto their helmets. Some of the closest guys got blasted backward, and the blacksmith only sighed, I warned you. Coughing hard, Kraft hauled himself up in there. In full view was Lifa, furious and smeared in soot. Her stare made one thing crystal clear. Sorry wouldn't cut it. He let out a mental cheer, grateful he never tested that device on the Cyclops, because if he had, there'd be nothing left but cold, icy dust. The girl came swinging hard, but Kraft snapped back fast. Trust me, it's easier to break the breed now. And that argument bought him the save. Lifa let out a sharp sigh and said, if we load the charges into drilled holes, the blast stays totally controllable, so, yeah, let's call it a drill explosion. The alchemist blurts out, genius, on the spot, but the blacksmith's glare slices through the praise. Cut it out. No more jokes. Kraft's heart nearly burst from his chest, but he just nodded like he had no choice. The rest of the team chipped in with warm words, then sat Alchem down and grilled him with a 2-hour lecture on caution. At dawn, still a little embarrassed but unbroken, they dashed back, because the whole village had already heard the news. They'd beaten the Cyclops. Joy exploded in the air as the kids surged around the mithril barrels, swarming them like it was the biggest prize at the party. With all that chaos roaring around them, Kraft and his squad stood out like the real heroes of the borderlands. Kyle and Mina met at the gates, and the Lord greeted the expedition's wife with big warmth, while the alchemist fumbled through an awkward explanation for where the angry blacksmith had vanished. When the village's traveling merchants heard the team really struck mithril, jaws dropped, then they swarmed Lifa, pushing offers into her hands like they couldn't wait to strike a deal. Before she could even breathe out a single word, the girl got slammed with questions about the sale. Some people argued prices on the spot, while others shoved money forward like they couldn't wait another second. Kyle clocked it instantly. Those merchants would do anything for that rare metal, and he pushed the plan to wait on reporting until Lifa finally arrived. The hero nodded in agreement and slid down beside Kyle's younger sister, who usually keeps close to her brother, but today she'd pulled away and said nothing. This totally threw Kraft for a loop. The girl didn't even spare him a glance, and he had zero clue what her behavior meant. Then a disheveled Lifa burst into the room, blurted out an apology for being late, and launched into her report. She told him she had barely slipped out of the trader's clutches, and Kraft clocked how messy her hair looked. Then she snapped it back into place like nothing happened, plopped into the main seat. The blacksmith yanked open the report. No pause, no hesitation. She kicked things off by painting the cave in wild detail. Stone lizards skittering around, glowing fireflies drifting through the air, and giant beetles crawling into view at every step of the exploration. 5 reasons he shot to the top: an explosive blast of magic, sharpening oil, a secret storage stash, razor-precise calculations, and, yeah, Lifa's knowledge was the real cheat code. She blushed when the praise hit. But she still gave credit to the team's tight unity because, thanks to that, they pulled it off with 0 injuries. She swore the endurance elixirs were everything, because without them, they never would have survived the Cyclops. The monster people said tore down every newcomer. Since that monster never stopped chasing until the very end, anyone who wasn't ready stood no chance at all. Kyle couldn't believe it, but everything worked out in the end. Kraft lifted his cup of tea, started to offer his thanks for the support, but then he felt everyone's watchful eyes pinned on him, as if they were waiting for him to deliver something. So he grilled Kyle for the next moves, and Kyle pushed the plan to pause selling mithril in the village. For now, Lifa instantly backed it. She leaned in and said, in Mifflin, a crazy revolution broke out among the masters. Those who couldn't even process mithril before suddenly learned how to do it. Demand skyrocketed. So only the right move was selling at the highest price, while all along, Kraft had one more request: pass some of that equipment to the local adventurers. Kyle didn't hesitate. He jumped on the idea, called it brilliant, and right then suggested they map out a plan. With the cash rolling in, Red Ox Squad instantly upgraded every piece of gear. Then, at dawn, Lifa charged up her forge and started melting mithril into ingots. Kraft wasn't against it, but before she got going, he pulled her aside to ask for a favor. In just a few days, while the hero was locked in with his potions, Lifa stormed into the workshop and shouted his name at full volume. Pride lit up her face. Everything was done. It just had to be inspected. And with her notes finally finished, Kraft shoved them aside and rushed to her. The girl kept squirming with impatience, while the young man burned with curiosity, wondering if the work would live up to the hype. A brand new alchemical crucible loomed in front of him, covered in breathtaking patterns. The craft proudly flaunted razor-sharp carving and a perfectly unified shape, turning it into pure, undeniable artwork. The compliments sent heat flooding her cheeks, and the blacksmith quickly rushed to suggest moving the cauldron into the alchemical room. The hero yanked the handle, and the moment he did, it snapped with a sharp, crackling spark, whipping him to loosen his grip. A faint crackle erupted into a roaring torrent of knowledge, flooding the young man's mind in one unstoppable wave. Leafa froze when Kraft slammed down and Kraft shot back. My head's been hit with a wild flood of information. She remembered that same exact spark flooding her chest the first time she forged her very first sample of her craft. Fresh knowledge slammed into his brain like a blowtorch, yet the alchemist saw exactly why it mattered and how it could be used. With a grin, he pushed, "Try the kettle right now." And Leafa let out a shocked little sigh. Kraft poured 2 wild elixirs into one vessel and blasted a surge of mana straight into the mix. Sparks blasted from the boiler, flashing in the girl's eyes as pure delight lit them up. A thick plume of steam shot up to the ceiling, and Leafa figured it was done. Then the alchemist only gave a calm nod, like he'd been waiting for something. So that's how they made the condensation olive for mithril, by tempering it again and again, until the metal turns ultra hard. The girl's check screamed the truth. This stuff is legit and top quality. Then the hero thrust a bottle in her hands so she could sample it. Leafa sucked in a sharp breath and bolted for the forge, while Kraft sank into his book, eyes fixed, waiting for the verdict to land. The moment the door swung wide, the blacksmith burst in from the threshold shouting about it. Fresh tools, a brand new hammer, brand new anvils, and enough weapon ideas to flood your head. She couldn't stop smiling at all the fresh opportunities, and the young man told her it was all her doing, yet Leafa wouldn't back down, insisting everyone owed it to the Twilight alchemist. Kraft awkwardly begged her to quit with the compliment. Sure, it all happened kind of by chance, but if Leafa's smiling, then he's smiling too. And without wasting a second, Kovali bolted back to the forge. Time to forge a few more trinkets. Before anyone could blink, she was already gone into the workshop, grumbling that her work was headed past the rooftops. Calling her was useless now, because the girl had fallen headfirst into a full-blown creative daze. 2 months vanished in the blink of an eye then. One morning, Reddick showed up at the alchemist and dropped the bomb. "Debut!" The craftsman pressed for details, and the swordsman slammed a flower of ambrosia onto the table. This legendary celestial bud hit the hero so hard it stole his breath away. Kyle and Alfred stared in total shock. Nothing like this had ever crossed their eyes, and they had zero clue how the squad snagged something this rare. Kraft just smiled and told Reddick, straight up, to verify the rumors. Everyone stared in awe at the sparkling petals except Persia, who pulled to the side and lifted her eyebrows like she was thinking way deeper than the rest of them. Reddick spread the map and pointed out the route. Sure, the road stretched forever, but they'd nailed the exact coordinates to the glade of ambrosia. The alchemist snapped. Don't trust your squad's pace. With endurance elixirs, they tore ahead faster than a whole herd of horses, and a normal expedition would still drag on for almost a month. Then he demanded to know if the place was safe, and the swordsman dropped the nightmare truth. Something monstrous was guarding the whole territory, and no matter how sneaky they tried, a dragon won't be fooled. And yeah, this is a real dragon. Green, wingless, yet packed with armored scales, brute strength, and endurance like a fortress built to never fall. Hearing that, Kyle, Mina, and the guards went stark white, because that green dragon isn't just dangerous, it's a nightmare no hunter survives. Kraft coldly weighed the threat. Yeah, it's terrifying. But now they've finally got the enemy's face in hand, and that alone is already half the win. Kyle cut the argument short, determined to make sure his friends wouldn't rush in and recklessly attack the monster. Reddick finally admitted it. This was the very strategy they'd hammered out while gearing up for the giant's onslaught. The young lord, shaking with fear, begged them to halt, because fighting that dragon felt like suicide. But the real question was, for what reason? Kraft stitched up the embroidery. Only a full bouquet of those flowers will do. because they're the secret key ingredient that can brew an elixir to cure his illness. Persia snapped to it in an instant without the dragon. There was no way they could grab the flower in the exact amount they needed. The alchemists slammed their fists down and swore they'll snatch up the ambrosia, then brew the medicine that finally heals Kyle for good. The Lord's heart got hit hard, but he still snapped back, refusing to gamble with his friends' lives just to satisfy his own needs. Kraft leaned in and hissed, "We're not just friends, we're family already, and family doesn't back away when it's time to save one of us." Kraft had predicted this reaction, but Kyle didn't flinch. He refused to let his friends pay the cost for him. Persia vowed right there with trembling respect that she'd give her life for him. But Kyle fully understood what that meant, and all he could do was break down in helpless tears. He admitted it flat out: if medicine demanded the blood of the people you love, then it wasn't medicine anymore, and he couldn't stomach that kind of burden. Kyle's words hit everyone hard, but the alchemist didn't budge. A caring leader, sure, yet this isn't just about his own health. Kraft slipped the map in his hands and demanded a second look, because the dragon's lair sat smack on the path of the road they're planning to build next. A massive green dragon slammed shut the road meant to link Dawn to 2 neighboring countries. Unless they smash it and win, all plans for progress are dead. So the job hits you from both sides. You've got to defend the settlement and, at the same time, snatch the key ingredient needed to craft the elixir. Alfred leaned in, voice trembling as he asked, "Can you really beat a dragon? Because every army that's met one knows the truth. You don't just charge at that kind of terror." Kraft snapped his hand toward the team. These weren't rookies. They had battle-hardened fighters, rock-solid mithril armor, and legendary elixirs, so the odds could finally swing in their favor. The Lord still tried to object, but Persia leaned in and shut him down. This chance to heal a disease only comes once in a lifetime. The alchemist threw in a second pitch. 2 ready-made elixirs, handed straight to the Margrave, and the nobles would lift Kyle's authority straight to the heavens. The guards nodded, feeling that good deal in their bones, while the Lord stared back in pure despair, because the responsibility crushing him only grew heavier. He demanded a pause, but Persia and Alfred had already signed on to help Kraft and pushed him to stick to the plan. Enraged, Kyle snapped at them to shut up. No heroics on his dime. Tugging Alfred by the cloak, the boy dropped to his knees and begged to be listened to. He didn't want glory if it meant someone else paying with their life. Tears quivered on his lashes, and guilt crushed him even before the fight ever started. Persia lowered his head, and Kraft sucked in a deep breath, swearing the battle would be mapped out with precision, and the danger would be cut down to the barest minimum. The road and your healing have one shared purpose. Yours isn't just a passing whim, the alchemist said, voice steady as he reached out and offered his hand. Kyle's hands shook, but hope flared in his eyes. If his friends truly waited all, then he'd do his best to trust them. No final call yet, but the first move is already locked in. The young lord demanded a moment to think, and the heroes geared up for the most serious mission the Dawn has ever seen. Kyle bowed his head so hard, tears flew onto the floor, and he begged everyone, "Please don't risk yourselves out there." Persia nearly broke down. Alfred exhaled a heavy sigh, and when Kraft finally clocked his own trigger words, he dropped to one knee before the young lord and offered a quiet, heartfelt apology. With gentle strokes through Kyle's hair, the alchemist vowed he'd reveal a plan that would crush every fear. In the yard, he shouted to Jutaro and demanded if everything was set. Kraft spotted the room had plenty of space and nodded to begin. Leafa snapped back to alert mode, begging them to stop the experiment. But the heroes swore they'd run this product dozens of times already. He said the whole show was only meant to soothe the Lord, and Kolvakal let out a heavy sigh, then stayed put to keep watching. Kai leaned in and whispered, "Stare at it closely, you're gonna be blown away." Jutaro stringed up the brand new mithril bow, then fished in an arrow packed with a microcharge. Stealing his nerves, the boy took careful aim and snapped the string free. The arrow slammed into the old tree. Boom, thunderous explosion tore through the silence, blasting splinters and dirt into the sky. Kyle gaped with wide eyes, and every other villager froze, too stunned into total silence by what they were seeing. Kraft fired the reminder at the Lord about the report's magical explosion, then smirked. This one's the version meant for arrows. If the charge can't be placed, it gets fired and delivered by a shot. Leafa's solid mithril bow hurls projectiles with deadly precision, blasting the dragon back before it can ever close the distance. Kyle stared at the weapon, admitting it was impressive, but his excitement never backed down. Persia leaned in with total confidence and said, "The chance to win is real." She dropped to one knee before the Lord, begging for his blessing to join the squad. Alfred dodged too, snapping into action to back up his teammate. Kyle narrowed his eyes. Turns out even the most loyal guards know they'll have to gamble anyway. They bowed even lower, like they were begging the world to know this was a deliberate choice. Kyle let out a heavy sigh and dropped his gaze. Kraft softly told them, "They love you like the whole village does. Everyone's hunting for a cure, but no one wanted to fake hope. Now it's time we face this together." Kraft flashed a grin at the Lord and swore at every soul in Dawn was ready to fight tooth and nail for his health. "Let us fix this for you," the alchemist said with ruthless confidence. Kyle wiped his tears away and, with a shaky voice, awkwardly admitted just how weak he really was. Persia couldn't hold back the tears, and her comrades wrapped the Lord in warm, friendly smiles as they stood by him. The boy finally confessed, "I'm terrified my choice will decide whether my friends live or die." As the settlement's leader, he had to whip his spirit into shape, so he nodded the mission through with a green light, but only after laying down one condition. He grabbed the squad's word he'd bring everyone back safe and sound. Clenching his fists, Kyle barely managed to choke back fresh tears, and when Kraft pressed a hand to his heart, he vowed straight-faced and unshaken to carry out the request. Only once everything was fully prepped did they lock in the performance day. At dawn, Reddick yanked the alchemist to the gate and set up a full-on spectacle. A massive line of volunteer adventurers, dying to get into the dragon hunt, stood right in front of the gates. Joining the fight promised pure glory, and the biggest prize of all, the chance to help Kalo and Sweden. Kraft felt a rush of grateful pride wash over him as he stared at those unshakable, determined faces. Leafa grinned as she watched them ride off. They were taking over the village's security, no questions asked, and the alchemist nodded back with total, unwavering trust. Right when the squad took off, Mina, still shy, snuck up on Kraft and snatched his cloak. The moment she finally spoke, she snapped, "Come back alive unharmed." Kraft gently stroked her head and vowed that they'd all come back together. With clenched fists raised, the adventurers roared their battle cry together. Then Reddick snapped the order and they launched into the fray. And that's how the hero squad kicked off their mission, charging straight into the lair of the Green Dragon. They burst out to the edge of the mountains, then slammed on the brakes, scanning the land and plotting the perfect route for their attack. One of the adventurers raised a telescope, and in the valley below he spotted a massive green giant sitting there with its back turned to them. The scout's eyes blew wide open. Everyone who laid eyes on the monster for the first time just froze, stunned solid. Right in front of them, a real green dragon sat there, barely twitching at all. Even from that far off, his sheer greatness punched through Reddick, who'd seen the monster once before, felt that icy fear slam back into him. He barked at Kraft, demanding to know if every piece of equipment was ready. The alchemist snapped, "It's done, everything's ready. Now we move." Reddick kicked off the first phase of the plan, blasting a warning that if things went sideways, they'd bail out right away. No heroics, no excuses. Once his signal hit, the adventurers slammed forward like an unstoppable avalanche. The dragon felt a deep rumble hit the air, then snapped its head toward the sound. With the whole squad gripping weapons and ready to strike, the monster snapped fully toward its opponents. Reddick roared, "Attack!" and Persia surged forward right beside him, with Reddick's flying slash propping him up. The swordsman surged forward, while Persia snapped into action with her quick heavenly spear. Saul and Jotaro loosed arrows, slicked with the oil of sharpness, and they screamed through the sky like blades finding their mark. The dragon realized it was boxed in from every angle. Its scales flashed like warning signs as it braced for the strikes. Reddick roared forward and slashed with his sword, carving a bloody red gash into the beast's paw. The monster roared like it was furious at the world, then bowed its head. Dark, chunky blood gushed from its wound and sprayed everywhere. The swordsman roared to the squad, "We press on," and the fighters slammed harder than ever. The dragon lifted its snout to the sky, and the alchemist's stomach dropped. This was it, A pillar of fire was about to roar out. The flame was already swelling in the beast's mouth, burning with pure hellfire heat. Now was the moment to strike. Kraft slammed his palms into the ground and snapped up a massive earth shield in front of the squad, bracing them to block the dragon's deadly breath. A colossal wall shot up between the dragons and the adventurers, and it slammed the fire wave back. This life-saving miracle kept everyone safe. Doc snapped everyone's attention to the plan. Kraft braced a magical shield to hold the fire back, and the flames ricocheted off the walls to turn around and burn the dragon itself. The fire was meant to ricochet off the barrier, then wrap the monster in flames from every direction. Kraft could feel it. The hero's wall was already splitting, and it looked like it wouldn't survive the next wave. He warned Reddick, and the message hit instantly. Now was the moment to move fast and make the call without hesitation. Reddick roared at the squad to fire up. He ordered them to get the explosives ready. While the dragon still cowered behind that barrier, a bunch of inventors rained down special arrows and let them fly straight at it. After landing several razor-accurate strikes, he triggered a massive explosion that shook everything around them. The gunfire finally died down. Then through that shattered wall, a bleeding dragon burst in, forcing everyone to scramble, and Perjex blurted, "Everything's going perfectly. The beast is starting to weaken." Success lit a fire under them, and they couldn't afford to stop this push, had to keep going, non-stop. Reddick barked the order. No streaming, and the archers instantly picked up their aim, unleashing volleys at the dragon again. Cornered and furious, the dragon screamed again so loud the ground buckled, and then its whole body erupted in a blinding flash, forcing everyone to shut their eyes. A weird magical seal blinked into existence above the beast, and the dragon's horn ignited with a blazing glow, so the adventurers braced themselves and went in for a counterattack. A blinding flash ripped across the battlefield, and they dove behind their shields, squinting through the ruthless glare. But the moment they opened their eyes, the dragon was just standing there, frozen in place like it had stopped the whole world. He lifted his head, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. Kraft stared in disbelief, scrambling to figure out why that beast had just kicked the magical circle to life. Everyone looked around, baffled, like that warning was nothing but an empty bluff. Jotaro shook like a leaf and squeaked that it was genuinely terrifying, then yanked his bow up and lined up an arrow straight at the monster's head. The moment the arrow kissed the dragon's horn, it froze in midair, then dropped like it had nothing left, because that strike totally failed. Jotaro reached for magic, then watched it fail, utterly, with zero results. He blurted out in shock the spell failed, and Kraft's mind started racing, trying to figure out what that flash and magical circle were really warning about. The dragon stayed frozen in place. Then it hit the hero like a truck. This monster had flipped on its protective magic. Kraft yanked Reddick aside and warned him light wipes out magic to the point that it even smothers magical attacks. If that's true, then he still haven't uncovered what the enemy can really do. Reddick decided it was smarter to back up, spun around, and tried to tell everyone what was going on. But before he could react, the dragon snapped its head up and started sucking in a blast of flames like it was about to exterminate everything. Kraft's blood went cold, because at that range his earth shield wouldn't stand a chance. Smoke was already pouring from the dragon's mouth, billowing like a living storm, and the hero snapped his gaze across everyone, yelling for an instant retreat. Everyone had leaned on him at some point, so he couldn't let a single person die here. As the retreat began to crumble, Kraft roared at Reddick with all the fury he had left. He demanded they unleash their skills right now, because only instant action could stop the whole situation from spiraling out of control. The guys were stunned that Kraft would even ask for something like that, but they didn't have a choice, so they had to go along with it. Pi snapped in a crushing shoulder strike, and Reddick kicked in acceleration. Both blows slammed Kraft in the back, and he shot forward screaming at insane speed. The hero skidded and rolled across the ground, taking brutal hit after brutal hit until he finally slammed to a stop. At that exact moment, the dragon yanked open its jaws and blasted a roaring wall of fire. Kraft clawed for his final ounce of strength and slammed the Great Earth Shield technique into action. While everything went up in chaos, the adventurers sprinted away from the attack's epicenter at full tilt, scraping by with just barely enough space to dodge the lethal flames. The hero panted hard, sweat streaming down his forehead, and still somehow he held his ground and protected everyone. Sora stared at the monster in pure horror, convinced it was all pointless now because hope was slipping away fast, and despair crushed every adventurer's heart. Sora dropped to his knees and admitted they couldn't win, while the hero froze should he bolt and save himself. If this went wrong, it could cost lives. But right then, I called his name. She figured that this monster had to be hiding a weakness, something it couldn't survive without. She leaned in and told the hero, "Cut off the dragon's horn, and it'll lose its power to neutralize magic." Georgia pitched her plan and shoved the hero with one crazy request: press the monster's head into the dirt somehow. Kraft just couldn't wrap his head around what she was really about to pull off. She snatched the sword, declared herself the formal god of Persia, and swore she'd do everything she could to carry out the plan. She lunged into the attack and demanded Kraft bring the dragon's head down then. Right then, she hacked the horn clean off. The hero finally got her plan, but putting it into action was brutally hard. The magic failed, and Kraft didn't know where to turn until he spotted an explosive arrow, and it lit up an idea in his head. He remembered the instant Chitara once loosed an arrow straight at the dragon. The arrow slammed home, and still no boom, no flash. Because this wasn't normal magic, the impact got cleanly stopped, smothered before it could erupt. So physical blows still hit hard, meaning they just might pull off the win. Kraft froze in place, because when Retta closed in, those other adventurers were already crouched behind the rocks, ready to disappear. He almost never got convinced, but if they even had a sliver of a chance, they had to grab it, because letting it slip would only make everything spiral harder. From the very first moment, he stood ready to throw his own life on the line to beat that dragon. And it felt worth every second. Kraft couldn't bear watching his friends throw everything into the fight, pushing to the very last breath and risking their lives. The young man balled his fists tight, swallowed his pride, and quietly apologized to them. The hero barked at everyone to hang on just one more breath, all the way to the very end, and every single person braced up and obeyed without question. While the others threw themselves at the monster, Kraft chugged the potion, shouted that he was counting on them all, and pushed, "Now we gather every last ounce of strength." After mulling it over, he finally saw it. He and Mesa could still pull off magic, which meant the dragon's anti-magic wasn't limitless after all. Looks like that monster's power is only good in a small range, or it hits with a delay. Kraft finally locked onto the plan. When he saw the dragon drawing up another fire attack, he snapped the warning to everyone without hesitation. Persia slammed the brakes and declared it would hold the line until the very end, while the rest of the crew flipped the great earth shield back on and reignited their fire protection. Reddock roared that they'd take the hit at the Mesa. He wanted them to hold the line, ride out the impact, and survive to the very end. Right then, the dragon roared and blasted fire, and the searing flames slammed straight into Mesa's shield. She planted her feet and stayed standing while her companions braced the defense behind her. But Kraft had to fight solo as tongues of flame lashed his body from head to toe. Even with the Red Oak group backing him up, the hero finally realized just how brutally hard it would be to survive this. His friends panicked. This young man was seared to the bone, burnt all over, and couldn't even lift himself until he finally crawled to the restoration potion. Kraft steadied himself just enough to push through the pain, and then he apologized to everyone. With his friend's help, he hauled himself back up and asked, breathless, how they were holding up. Right then, the smoke started to thin out, and Kraft caught sight of a pack of Reddock led by Mesa, and everyone was standing there, alive. He figured only real madmen would dare to stand up to that monster right here in the middle of the city. The boy snapped his eyes back on the dragon. Its throat was already gathering for another vicious inhale, and Kraft only leaned in and whispered, "Too late." The moment the dragon lifted its head, a massive boulder was already hanging in the air right over it. Kraft knew this moment didn't just happen. It was forged by every single one of his friends. Without missing a beat, he hurled that boulder straight onto the dragon's head, so precise, it felt surgical. If the magic won't work, then it's throw down time straight to physical blows. The stone slammed the monster in the neck, and it got driven straight into the ground. Kraft bellowed at Persia to move now. No hesitation, no waiting. The girl snatched the thrown bottle out of midair and gulped down every drop the second it hit her hands. That potion was a total breakthrough once Persia felt it kick in. She realized it briefly shattered the limits of what humans could do, and Kraft was convinced, as long as this lasts, everything would work. Persia burst forward and, with a single brutal strike, she hacked the dragon's horns clean off. The monster screamed in agony and the girl started to pitch forward. The hero's gut churned with fear for Persia, but that girl clenched her teeth and stood her ground right up to the very end. She told him to stop worrying about her and to end this battle fast. Kraft roared to everyone that the dragon's defenses had crumbled. Now it was time to land the final crushing blow. Kraft clenched his jaw. This was it, the final showdown, and they fought with everything they had as every shooter knocked an arrow and let them fly. The hero unleashed heavenly thunder and rare rock strike every single hit. Even the arrows landed on the dragon at the exact same time, and Red Oak ended it for good with one decisive crushing blow. Before long, wild rumors tore through the village. Kraft and his squad were back. Everyone surged toward the entrance, and out front, Kyle and Alfred just couldn't wait. When he saw those battered, exhausted boys, one villager couldn't stop himself. Could they really have pulled off the win? And beside him, a woman clapped a hand over her mouth, panic flooding her as she realized how many might have died. The heroes were buzzing with good spirits. Kraft burst out that everyone had made it back safe. Kyle bolted to Kraft, snatched him by the collar, and blurted out in tears. He was just so relieved he was alive. The hero flinched and begged, "Hey, don't squeeze me like that, it still hurts." Suddenly, Leafa burst in on them, crying too, and blurted that Kraft had been through hell, and she was just relieved he'd come back. The hero nodded along, already itching to jump back to the report. But Leafa cut in. This wasn't the real point. "Forget all that," she said. "The only thing that matters is that he's alive." Kraft blinked at Reduk, still confused, and Reduk just shrugged his head like the answer was obvious. Leafa insisted they hadn't lost a single person because even a retreat can be bravery, and she stood by the truth that they fought with dignity, even if the hero was itching to prove their victory faster. And just like that, he ripped open the spatial storage and exposed the main evidence for everyone to see. Out of nowhere, a severed dragon's head crashed into view and hit the ground with a brutal, loud "th." Everyone stood there in stunned silence, and the hero snapped, "It's way too heavy, so I had to tuck it into a magical pocket of space." Leafa's jaw dropped in pure shock. She couldn't move, completely stunned. She nearly blacked out, and Kraft snapped to the truth. He'd pulled it way too fast, and he couldn't stomach how it all ended like this. Then the crowd erupted. "The dragon's head, it's here!" But when they planted that head in the middle of the square, Leafa snapped her hand over her mouth. She had no clue what to say to him. She didn't want to upset him, but she pushed the idea. "Try living in my shoes. See it from the outside." Kraft squirmed with awkwardness, then dropped a real, heartfelt apology. The hero had zero clue this was about to blow everyone's mind. And then, boom, Mina suddenly plopped herself onto his lap. Kraft stumbled over an awkward mumble about his legs going numb, but he just couldn't bring himself to ask her to move. In his wild imagination, Mina stared at him, shocked, and asked why she couldn't sit down, and even though he'd said otherwise, Kraft shrugged it off, let her stay, and quietly thanked her. Kyle stepped in and told everyone to stop, breathe, and lay it all out: what happened, what it meant, and what they were thinking. The tale kicked off. Kraft launched into the fight with the dragon, and even with their gear wrecked beyond belief, they still pulled off the win with 0 casualties. Leafa couldn't even process it. Somehow they'd come back safe and sound, and they'd actually crushed the dragon to win. The hero added that they crushed the main mission, snagging plenty of ambrosia flowers and rare herbs too. Yeah, victory was the goal, but they still nailed the side quest. They hauled in a mountain of valuable ore and magical treasures, and Kyle immediately promised the guild's problem would land on Leify's shoulders. Leify only grinned and swore she'd get everything under control. Kraft told Reduk to spill every detail of the battle, and Reduk nodded and kicked off his story right from the magical part. Mina didn't say a word. She just sat there with a soft smile, soaking up every second of their conversation. As night swallowed the sky, The villagers dragged Kraft and Reduk straight into the heart of their settlement. A banner swung overhead bragging about the victory over the dragon, and the heroes stared at the inscription like it spoke a language he didn't get. Then Jotaro snapped his hand and waved at Kraft, yelling for him to come see what they'd set up for the celebration. Dead center in the field sat a monstrous, severed dragon head, and Jotaro grinned like it was straight out of a cool poster, while Kraft's gut screamed dark ritual. Kyle stepped onto the stage, fired up the crowd, and thanked everyone, because thanks to their combined efforts, they'd finally driven one of the most terrifying monsters out of these lands. Previously, this place was branded the Land of Monsters. Nobody could live here. Every attempt ended in failure. But after that victory, the danger finally broke, and now the settlement can grow safe and strong. Kyle stood up and shouted his thanks to everyone, settlers, merchants, and even the heroes and adventurers who pulled off this incredible feat. He wasted no time. He told everyone to toast the dragon-slaying victory, and the villagers lifted their mugs and clinked their drinks. Kyle yanked his mug up, nearly sloshing it over, and urged everyone to toast the victory. That evening exploded into a full-on celebration Lifa, and Kyle dug into the food with zero hesitation, while Red Oak drew in a whole cluster of girls, and Sora sat on the sidelines, simmering with jealous rage. Alfred and Kraft kept the drinks coming non-stop, while Persia got pushed through treatments even as she kept refusing them. The moment Kraft stepped away, someone shouted his name. It was Retta, grinning. He teased that the hero had already downed plenty, but Kraft shook his head, looking kind of devastated, because nope, not even close, and still Retta couldn't see what was actually worrying him. He just said no question about it, they stole the win because of. Kraft shot a glance to the left and said he'd only done what he could, and Reddick just smiled, because the hero didn't even know how far he'd already gone. People, gear, a full plan. And that hard work is exactly why the fight was already won. Kraft flicked his eyes to the constellation emblem on his arm and grinned. Honestly, all the credit goes to this little thing. He traced the glowing lines with one careful finger, murmuring that he'd never managed to thank his brand enough, and Reddick just nodded. The swordsman snapped that even without the coat of arms, Kraft would have cooked up something else, because organizing talent was born in him. Reddick couldn't quite explain how, but he was certain he'd rally the adventurers and push this to the very end, and the hero just grinned, like he knew his friend was right. He scanned the crowd erupting with joy over their shared victory, and the truth hit him like a spark. Yeah, this is exactly what his own hard work made happen. Reddick nailed it this time. Success was forged around Kraft, for real. Caught in those thoughts, he slid aside, dropped onto the grass, and stared up at the blazing, star-filled sky. Soft footsteps crept up behind him, and someone had finally clocked that he was alone. Lifa held a mug in both hands, flashed him a grin, teased that the hero was already pretty tipsy, and then plopped down right beside him. The girl fired off a question. If the dragon's dead, does that mean no attacks can happen anymore? Kraft remembered how Li-Fi's village was torn apart by monsters when he was a kid. Then he told us the danger's much smaller now, but it's still not gone. The odds of history repeating itself with another tragedy are now razor thin, and honestly, that's already a win. Hearing that, Lifa grinned, then tilted her face to the night sky and stared at the stars. She slid quietly against Kraft's shoulder, and hot tears from memory streamed down her cheeks. The hero stayed quiet beside her until the blacksmith's apprentice finally dozed off, his breathing easing peacefully against her arm. After days of brutal, non-stop work, Kraft finally finished his masterpiece, the Elixir of Life. Kyle stared in shock like the alchemist had somehow turned into a blob of thick cream. But this time, the alchemist wasn't messing around with mere potions. Kraft grabbed a spoon and declared, "Swallow it, this medicine has to come from inside, since the sickness was born in you." And Persia and Alfred froze, terrified of what might happen next, even with everyone doubting him. Kyle snatched up the spoon, gulped down a thick dose of the elixir, and braced himself for whatever happened next. Everyone swarmed Kyle with questions. The second he came to Persia and Alfred were terrified he'd spiral worse, But Kraft stepped in and told them they were making it a bigger deal than it was. Kyle shot back that all he could taste was pure cream. Then his eyes snapped wide in shock, and the guards' faces went ghostly as panic hit them, because they thought something terrible just went down. Tears burst from the boy's eyes. Persia snapped in panic what happened, and Kyle leaned in and whispered. On the contrary, Kraft ripped his own shirt tight to his chest, and the pain and exhaustion that had haunted him his whole life vanished in an instant. Then the boy's eyes lit up, stunned and overflowing with relief. Tears slipped down his cheeks until warm hands grabbed him and pulled him close. Persia and Mina shoved themselves close to Kyle, grinning ear to ear as pure joy burst between them. Tears of joy blazed in Persia's eyes. She'd always known this day would finally arrive. The three stayed locked in that tight embrace for what felt like forever. Alfred even wiped at the wet corner of his eye, while Kraft just smiled and quietly slipped back. Alfred finally caught the alchemist, snapped his gaze up close, and bowed in silence. Like even words of gratitude couldn't possibly cover what he felt. He admitted he had no idea how to properly repay that kindness, because a simple thank you just wouldn't cut it. And Kraft was relieved that the medicine worked cleanly, without a single complication. Alfred nodded, saying the potion was absolutely mind-blowing, but then sighed because there was only one single jar of it left. Then it hit him just a few doses could wipe the disease out for good, the perfect dream. Kraft grinned. One? Actually, Alfred froze on the spot because what he just heard sounded impossible. The alchemist yanked open a side door and slammed a table full of bottles in front of Kyle. 129 Sirens, the legendary drink that cranks up abilities. 73 Amities, an elixir that keeps you rejuvenated for a whole year, and 47 doses of medicine meant to keep Kyle standing. What they witnessed left everyone, even Kyle, completely stunned. The Lord clutched his head and snapped. This is way too much. I cried in vain. Persia grabbed Kraft by the lapels and roared, What, did you lose your mind? The alchemist only squirmed as he finally admitted he'd gone a little too far. Kyle muttered to himself that these rare potions could rake in a fortune if he sold them in the capital. Kraft knew trouble always finds you, so he decided to cut straight to the point and hand the treasures right to His Excellency, Margrave Baylor. Persia and Alfred locked eyes in shock, stunned by how wildly far ahead that proposal went, while Margrave Baylor was already pulling his eldest son aside for a no-more-waiting emergency talk. In Margrave Baylor's office, Zaid showed up, and right away, his father thrust a brand-new letter from Kyle into his hands. The older son braced for round after round of complaints from the younger one, but their father cut in with a calm promise. Everything was different this time. As the Margrave read the report out loud, he bragged that Kyle had penned something unreal. Zaid skimmed the lines for a second and nearly dropped the parchment. The message hit. The squad crushed the dragon, and they're hauling the legendary elixir brewed from collected herbs straight to the worthy, personally. So the hero and his crew are about to crash onto the lands of Baylor any minute now. Kraft grinned and slammed a friendly slap on Kyle's back, then promised to show him everything they'd managed to pull off during all that time. The young lord clenched his nerves and finally nodded, agreeing to the alchemist's ruthless plan. While they rolled along, Kraft leaned toward the carriage window and basically couldn't help it. Those local landscapes were jaw-dropping. So much time has slid by since he last had to come back into these parts. Kyle breathed out in relief, then Persia's face darkened the second she saw what was going on. Lord realized he shouldn't have said that out loud, then apologized while Persia blinked in shock. Couldn't figure out why he snapped at her, and Kraft just smirked like, yeah, they way more complicated than they look. Kyle once grabbed the hero's attention and demanded he call Kyle brother, like a bold oath to honor him the same way. Persia seethed that Kraft needed to know his limits and stop treating that title like it meant everything. But the alchemist only smirked like he knew those words were really meant for Kyle. Meanwhile, Jotaro stood there soaking in the Margrave's magnificent city, while Kyle checked the capital and realized it was even more packed. Plus, these gates never shut and nobody charged a single toll. If that hunter had realized this sooner, he'd be here already, no doubt about it. So, when the Lord told him to scout the place while he still had free time, Jotaro nodded and jumped at the chance. Kraft watched the guy and couldn't help but stare at his wild nerve. Then Persia snorted. Yeah, but Don't act like you're any less bold. Lifa sat by the window, soaking in the scenery in quiet awe as their crew surged forward. Right as they neared the gate, armed guards caught them and demanded to know if they had any ties to Margrave Baylor's estate. Kraft didn't get it right away, but Persia leaned in and spelled it out, just a routine check, and Alfred nodded and confirmed they'd been invited inside. The guards begged them to take a detour since the main street was packed with people. Alfred snapped out a grateful "thank you" for their service, and Kyle poked out of the carriage window to sincerely thank the soldiers too. The moment the guards spotted the young lord, shock hit them so hard that the whole place went dead silent for a beat. And then, in the blink of an eye, the soldiers snapped to attention and started welcoming Mr. Kyle back like a hero. They swore he looked shockingly healthy, and honestly, they weren't wrong. Kyle just grinned and told them he felt amazing. Alfred told them this was only a quick stop and demanded total secrecy, so the guards nodded, understood, and promised they'd keep it under wraps. Then the escort slid back into their spots inside the carriage, and Kraft kept staring out at the glass soaking in the rolling landscapes and the sea's dazzling sparkle. At last, the crew finally burst through to the massive gate of the family estate. Kyle admitted he hadn't been here much since he grew up in a rural home, and Jitaro shot back that nobles almost never come back to their roots. All hard, warning Kyle to be smarter and more cautious. Kyle leaned in and promised there was nothing to fear, because with the report they'd whipped up together, he'd finally walk up to his father with full confidence. The young man shot each friend a heartfelt smile and thanked them for every bit of help, straight from the heart. Jitaro flashed a shared smile and praised the Lord's kindness, and Kraft clocked Persia, quickly covering her face to smother her emotions. Lifa clocked that it was time to go, so Kraft leaned in and told Mina to loosen her knees. But Mina dug in, refusing to get down, and Kraft decided it probably wasn't smart to march into the palace with a child hauled in his arms. Kovalka leaned in and whispered with a sly grin, like Mina had finally locked on to him, and Kraft just stared, shrugged, and couldn't believe it. As soon as everyone spilled out of the carriage, the guards barked for the gates to be raised. Kraft and Mina strolled along behind them, calm as ever, while Jitaro zoomed around the yard like he owned the place, until Persia snapped and shouted for him to act right. Meanwhile, Zaid leaned from the window, watching, already waiting for his brother to show up. Irritation flashed across his face, and pure disdain followed. Kyle's return didn't just upset him. It clearly annoyed him to the core. Soon, the guests were marched through the castle doors and greeted by the young lord's relatives. Margrave Baylor lounged at the head of the table, with Fratton's eldest son right beside him, and Zaid, the second son, sitting close on his other side. Father spotted an intriguing report and demanded he explain everything to him right there, firsthand. Kyle confirmed he came in person because he had a ton to tell and plenty to show. Zaid's patience snapped, but he clenched his teeth and held back. Then the Margrave demanded his son kick off the audience with the report on their victory and all they'd accomplished. Kyle flashed politeness to Kraft and begged, "Show the elixirs to my father." With the stern Margrave's eyes locked on him, the alchemist's hands started to tremble on their own, pure, blazing excitement spilling out of every breath. Kraft grimaced, already wishing the big moment had waited for the finale as his face went pale. Then Kyle them an encouraging nod, and the hero finally snatched the first box from storage. On the table, 44 bottles of elixir lined up like a trap, plus 129 Siren and 73 Amity. Zaid jolted, sweat flashing across his temple. He'd never laid eyes on that many liquids in one place. The Margrave clutched Kyle's letter, and one eyebrow shot up. That's not child's play. The young lord admitted he didn't even need that pile of wealth himself, so he decided to hand the treasures straight to his father. When Baylor finally clocked how huge those wins were, he spun to his son and blurted, "Take pride in yourself. This is a real feat." Kyle's eyes exploded with pure joy. He leaned in and thanked his father for those warm words that hit straight in the heart. The Margrave talked to himself, saying the best herbs should be handed to His Majesty, but the leftovers must not be dumped all at once, or the market would get shaken. While Fratton's elder son was already checking out Amity, the one that grants youth. Then the father steered the talk straight to the dragon and asked, "Elixirs are just circumstantial proof. So tell me, Is there anything that hits harder? Kyle stayed cool and said, "We brought the dragon's head. Demaru, wedem, edium wise." The Lord jabbed a finger at Kraft and said, "She's tucked inside his spatial storage." Bratton's eyebrows shot up, because that claim sounded way too unreal. The older brother narrowed his eyes and shot a sneaky, suspicious glare. He skeptically hummed, "I swear he's calling a normal big lizard a dragon." With a fake smile and sharp manners, he decided the kid had just learned to blow everything up, because that's what a real aristocrat supposedly does. Baylor suggested they check out the trophy in the garden, but Kyle shot back that the backyard is way too cramped. Bratton just grinned and pushed for the main one, where the crowd will be bigger. "Let them see it too if this dragon is really that huge," he said, needling Persia and Alfred with a grin, and Jotaro hissed. If family ties didn't hold them back, those two would have gotten a beating ages ago. Kraft said, "Even the proper garden would feel way too tight. The trophy would smash right through every flower bed." Zaid lost it and burst into laughter. "Then go ahead and let them try to break it if that's how it's supposed to be." Dad, fed up with the non-stop arguing, finally let the show happen right out in the huge front yard, and Kyle thanked him for seeing his side. As everyone spilled out onto the open lawns, Kraft caught sight of Zaid in the palace window. He was leaning forward, practically vibrating with anticipation for the whole spectacle. The alchemist blasted his voice into the air with magic, shouting to the passing crowd, "Please, just a moment of your attention." And the whole street snapped around instantly, while Lifa couldn't believe how crisp and clear every word sounded. With everyone's eyes locked on him, Kraft yanked open the storage portal, a giant dragon head slamming down across half the clearing, and Fratton's laughter got cut mid-breath as the crowd exploded into wild cheers. Everyone blared the news at full volume. The Margrave's third son, Kyle Baylord, had just pulled off something absolutely legendary. With his brilliant vision steering the whole crew as one, they carved out a new settlement in the land of monsters and smashed the terror lurking on the outskirts once and for all. Nobody would guess plain words could do that, so the audience got front-row proof for themselves. Kraft let out a solemn call, summoning everyone to celebrate the young ruler who was just beginning to shine. Then boom, Kyle heard a thunderous crash behind him as the giant head of the defeated dragon hit the ground. The scaly trophy kicked up a cloud of dust, so close it nearly kissed the mansion's facade. And the Margrave plus everyone watching snapped their eyes wide, stunned by what they were seeing. He blinked back into consciousness, and the crowd blew up with shocked screams, hands shooting into the air. "Incredible! This is the biggest beast we've ever seen." The kids went wild, thrilled they got a real hero serving them. Kyle shot Zaid a smug glance, forcing him to swallow his skepticism, while behind them the girls just stared in stunned silence, because Kraft had once again blown them away with sheer grandeur. The alchemist could only pray he hadn't pushed it too far this time, because he did warn them ahead of time. Thrilled locals swarmed around the trophy, jostling as they begged each other. "Don't push!" The soldier snapped into action, shoved everyone into neat lines, and made it clear no one was escaping that trophy. One of the managers let out a heavy sigh. Workloads had surged, but at least he'd gotten Kraft's warning. Kyle wasted no time, apologized for the mess, and tried to make it right. The Margrave marched the guests into the grand hall and urged everyone to sit down, and Lord Kyle couldn't stop himself, even pushed the idea of charging a fee just to view the dragon relic. Her father shot back. "No need to rush, do it wrong and it'll blow up like a powder keg. And if the word spreads too loud, everything turns to chaos." In the end, the Margrave handed the whole mess to the formal office, determined to craft a safe plan that would keep everything under control. Kraft had already heard rumors about this official, and just from Persia's look, he knew it was someone powerful. Everyone should fear. Baylor turned to his son and roared, "You handled that dragon brilliantly." Kyle shot him a grateful nod, and the Margrave bowed to their allies too. Alfred just smiled and said it was an honor. The settlement claimed it already had 1,000 residents, but a brutal housing crisis slammed the door on any new settlers. So Zaid had to sit through his brother's triumphs with a heavy, reluctant heart. Then crashed the door, blew open, and someone barged in without a word mid-conversation, slamming every eye straight to the entrance. Even with the Chamberlain trying to block her, the Margravine swept into the hall beside another noble lady, quiet, shadowy, and so ready to dive into whatever was about to explode next. The Margrave gave Grin a nod and said, "Bella, Rila, this is it. We need to talk, and it's important." Grin shot back, "I understand perfectly," even if it looked like she had zero business speaking up. The lady went for it anyway, and then Kyle quietly leaned in and explained everything to Kraft. Right in front of them stands their father's old second wife, now First Lady, Vela, while her daughter Rila is at her side. And it's Vela who's the mother of Zaid. Vela swished her lush fan over half her face and pointed out that, no matter what happened, she still got to speak then. The Margrave grudgingly caved. The woman practically gushed that Kyle's accomplishments were straight up incredible. He lit up with praise way more than when his friends congratulated him, so Kraft couldn't believe how big the reaction was. Vela kept going. This new settlement was exploding in growth, and there was no doubt it was all thanks to that young lord. Brett nodded and admitted it hit the mark. Then Zaid leaned in and made it clear. The village sits right near his own estates. So Vela said, "It's the right call. Give Zeta control of this settlement." A stunned hush crashed into the hall, and Kayla felt ice-cold frost sink straight through her. Zaid just grinned like a hero, smugly smug, claiming she only stated the obvious. Between the Zeta estate and the village stretched a dead, desolate patch of wild land, and Kraft finally got it. This plan didn't match reality at all. The Margrave stayed mute, so Vela pressed her question to him one more time. She reminded everyone that thanks to the medication, Kyle had finally beaten his congenital weakness, so keeping him close now meant he could help his father in the capital, and at first glance that reason hit hard. Honestly, it was obvious. His stepmother was just flexing her power to boost her own son's standing, and Zaid backed the whole plan without hesitation. Kraft finally got it. Zaid wasn't just talking. He wanted to cash in on Kyle's hard work. "Bail bet you give, you will biz, you will them chil bim enemy billiams, furil them and will fail of them, but he's sebadies," he said. "Now that the illness is gone, you've got nothing to fear, so hand it over to the more experienced guy, me." With a fit of happy giggles, Zaid stared at his brother's totally baffled face and loved every second. Fran watched the entire scene in total silence. Then, when the moment finally came, he demanded the floor, and the Margrave promptly leaned in to listen. Bratton backed a mother's plan, then leaned in and pushed one wild twist. Kyle needed a brand new, still unexplored possession. He gave the court cartographer a sharp nod and demanded, "Show me the map." Leafa's face lit up as she stared at the detailed royal map, and Kraft couldn't believe ordinary eyes ever got a look like this. Thoradin crouched in, scanning the canvas for fresh territory to crown the pioneer. Bratton jabbed his finger at the cross on the map right here, beside the spot where the dragon once called home, right by the Dovaton Empire's doorstep. Beyond those jagged mountains, the Zebius Federation sat waiting, and between them clung a handful of tiny states, ripe for growth and full of opportunity. Kyle's brother was convinced Kyle could build settlements like nobody else, so he pushed the idea, hand him the reins, and let him develop this whole region. The Margrave was still weighing it when Vela cut in from the front of the hall. She felt Fratton was stripping her son of dignity, acting like he couldn't possibly handle the job. Bratton shot back, and not a little. Zaid already has more than enough tangled responsibilities, and building a whole new settlement is just too big a gamble. Rila beamed and said that brother's idea is pure brilliance. If both projects kick off at the same time, you'll instantly see who can actually pull their weight. The mother beamed with satisfaction and praised her daughter for that bold viewpoint. She figured Kyle would finally get his chance to prove his success wasn't just luck. And once Kraft heard all of it, rage surged so hard he could barely hold it in, because it felt like everyone was gunning to tear Kyle down. In the end, Kyle threw his final word into the air, and just like that, he accepted the offer. Persia, Alfred, and Leif just stared in shock, while Zaid burst into laughter, totally clueless how his brother suddenly got that smart. Kraft still couldn't figure out why, but Kyle's eyes screamed confidence, and before the moment slipped away, he shot up and demanded he had two requests. First, we keep the name Golden Dawn, no shortcuts. Second, the message hit Kraft and the peasants hard, because they'd suffered through it all together. Kyle pushed for it. Everyone who was ready had to join him. The law basically chained peasants to their own regions, no wandering off on their own unless you lived in a special settlement, so they had to beg for permission. But Vela snapped back right away. No way. You don't get a single resource, and you don't touch any property. Kayla stared in disbelief, then shot to her feet and roared out, "Hey, stepmothers, how are they supposed to move to a whole new land with zero supplies?" But she didn't budge. She'd give them no permission. Then Kyle pleaded for one thing. The guilds and individuals keep their own property. The Margrave pressed his son hard, demanding to know if he truly agreed, and Kyle snapped back that if that's how it had to be. Zaid burst into laughter and announced it was all settled, then flashed a mocking grin and went, "Kyle's finally acting like a real aristocrat." Kraft didn't get a single thing, so he leaned in and quietly demanded why Kyle just went along with everything. Kraft clocked it instantly. Kyle was definitely cooking up something. Then the Margrave snapped his hand out, shut the meeting down on the spot, and gave everyone the go-ahead. Just as everyone started to scatter, the Margrave grabbed Kraft's attention and ordered him to stay then, told him to come by later, and Kraft felt ice-cold dread crawl down his spine. Meanwhile, the Margrave sipped his tea like he owned the world, calmly waiting for what came next. The hero, Kraft, finally barged in, blurted out an apology, and took his seat at. He hesitated, then raised the cup of tea and took a cautious sip right as the Margrave stared him down the whole time, making the young man squirm. Kraft started to panic. This dead silence was killing him, and he just wanted the Margrave to finally broke his silence, dropping the wild idea that the boy might be one of the Twilight alchemists. He heard the young man knew medicine like a pro and could back it up with real skill. Kraft shot him a grateful thanks, and then the Margrave leaned in, asking if he'd heard anything at all about Jarval Galleon. The boy blinked in shock, because the question was about her. Specifically, he knew Jarval was an absolute genius alchemist who'd cracked the code on fertilizers, and she wasn't just that. She also healed the sick and wrote it all down too. Kraft couldn't stop himself from grinning. Just the thought of her lit up his eyes, because he'd devoured every single one of her books. He shut his eyes and pictured her as a sweet, warm old grandmother. He couldn't believe it. This legend only works for the Margrave. He couldn't even form the words. Why was she serving him? The Margrave figured she'd be eager to meet Kraft. He guided her straight to her mansion, and Kraft bowed low, then flashed a promise. "I'll be there." He stepped outside and let out a breath of relief. Those words had been rattling his nerves, but just before he could go, the Margrave stopped him to take care of Kyle. The hero blinked at the weird request, then immediately promised. They carried it out then, later. The carriage rolled up with the hero and the Duke to the Jarval mansion. The old ivy-choked house looked deserted, and crows shrieked from the trees like they were warning someone. While Kraft stared at the creepy landscape, a wooden man suddenly lumbered out of nowhere and demanded he come with him. Right behind him, the hero jerked in shock. The men ansem yon defu, imol demim bu in. Bu Jim in if him in Schumiden Bus Kaipgementrum Frey and Schubenschkan Shik Shuan Fanch Finance. Chasing the creature, he realized Zarval was clearly more than capable of what came next. The moment the wooden guest spun around, he told the hostess, "I brought Mr. Kraft." From the room, a sharp, irritated voice snapped, "He's late, let him in." Kraft tiptoed in, forced out a greeting, and figured the guy in front was Zarval. Then he finally looked up, and his eyes went wide in disbelief. Right in front of him sat Zarval herself, and she looked like a girl, just a little older than him.